Sorry.
Can you make a deal today, sir? Just go up. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, press. 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 Let's go. Thank you, press. Thank you, press. Thank you, press. Let's go. Come on, guys.
Come on, guys. Let's go. Let's go.
Thank you, press.
Let's go.
Thank you, press. Thank you, press. Thank you, press.
Let's go. Let's go.
Thank you, press. 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 Everybody get out of the room! Come on, guys. Thank you, press.
Mr. President.
Thank you, press.
President Putin, why should President Trump trust your word now?
Thank you, press. 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 Thank you, press.
Thank you.
Thank you, press. Thank you, press. Thank you, press. Thank you, press. Let's go. Come on, guys. Thank you, press. Thank you, press.
President Putin, why should President Trump trust your word now?
Thank you, press. 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 Thank you, press.
Thank you.
Thank you, press. Thank you, press. Thank you, press. Thank you, press. Let's go. Come on, guys. Thank you, press.
Mr. President.
Thank you, press.
President Putin, why should President Trump trust your word now?
Thank you, press. 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 Thank you, press.
Tú necesitando dinero para proyectos y por otro lado hay convocatorias en donde nadie se presenta por desconocimiento y no se logran asignar los recursos. Solo en Latinoamérica se pierde más de $1 billón cada año y es seguro que es mucho más.
Cada vez que decides y como se los anunciamos a ustedes en las noticias el día de hoy y después de este editorial estaríamos con el doctor Francisco Bernate, abogado penalista, que está con nosotros para hablar de la impugnación en el caso del proceso que se surte contra el expresidente Álvaro Uribe Vélez. Profesor, doctor Francisco Bernate, bienvenido a La Hora de la Verdad. Muchas gracias por atendernos.
Por favor, muchísimas gracias a ustedes por esta invitación. Muy buenos días, un saludo muy especial. Dumar, muchas gracias por esta invitación, pero también permíteme saludar al doctor Fernando Londoño, a todo el equipo de La Hora de la Verdad y por supuesto
esto afecta también el comercio internacional de una serie de bienes. Para Europa, por ejemplo, esto es supremamente grave porque afecta también el precio de los carburantes, afecta todo el asunto del gas, el precio del gas licuado en Europa es supremamente grave en Europa porque los precios han incrementado a más del 300% desde que la guerra empezó en el 2022, lo mismo sucede con los precios globales del petróleo, es decir, esta es una cosa que tiene repercusiones muy amplias. Esta es una cosa que Putin esto lo sabe, muy amplias. Putin esto lo sabe. Putin sabe que puede jugar esta carta a su favor y que uno no siempre tiene mucho margen de maniobra para hacer cosas, pero creo que también deberíamos esperar que Trump en ese sentido está demostrando que se le está acabando la paciencia y que quiere demostrar también por una cuestión de orgullo personal, porque él es muy así como persona también. Él quiere mostrar que él es quien tiene la sartén por el mango. Y en ese sentido podríamos perfectamente esperar que incluso si Putin decide sacar uno de los ases bajo la manga que tiene, que es simplemente decir, pues la guerra continúa bajo mis términos y ustedes verán qué hacen, pues Trump dice, ok, vale, pues a mí no me tiembla la mano con imponer aranceles y sanciones varias sobre cuántos miembros sea necesario de la sociedad internacional.
Bien, ahora vamos nuevamente a Kiev con nuestra corresponsal Emanuel Chas para que nos cuente precisamente, hablábamos del tema en terreno, qué está ocurriendo con Ucrania en esta guerra que libra contra Rusia desde hace más de 3 años ya.
Buenos días, pues desde hace algunos días hemos visto aquí en Ucrania avances de las fuerzas rusas, especialmente en el sector de Dobropilia y Kramatorsk. Este es una situación importante porque por un lado demuestra que los rusos no se están preparando para una pausa de los combates, al contrario, están aumentando la presión sobre Ucrania en el sector de la región de Donetsk. Sin embargo, lo que también resulta interesante es que en pocos días, basándonos en fuentes abiertas y según soldados con quien he podido hablar en la zona de combates, estos avances no solo han sido detenidos, siendo repelidos por las fuerzas ucranianas. Y del mismo modo, el ejército ucraniano afirma haber eliminado a todos los rusos, los soldados rusos que se habían infiltrado en la ciudad de Pokrovsk, una ciudad que los rusos codician desde hace más de un año sin éxito. Así que aunque los ucranianos no hayan logrado recuperar sus territorios propios, los rusos tampoco han alcanzado sus objetivos y por lo tanto no hay ninguna razón para que Kiev abandone el resto de la región de Donetsk ni ninguna otra parte de su territorio.
Bien, Emanuel, dicho esto, finalmente que nos cuentes acerca de, ya sabemos que ya es muy noche por allá, pero ¿qué esperan los ucranianos más allá de estar decepcionados de no haber estado presentes en este encuentro?
Pues hay poco esperanzas por el lado ucraniano porque hay un temor grande aquí que el presidente ucraniano Vladimir Zelensky no es en esta reunión y el futuro de Ucrania se discute, estaba hablando ucraniano sin Kiev, sin los ucranianos. Sí, eso es un problema para una población que se defiende hace 3 años y medio contra una invasión a gran escala y con bombas rusas que siguen golpear ciudades. Hoy por la mañana en el mercado central de la ciudad de Sumy y también en otras ciudades en el sur del país, en las ciudades de Dnipro y de Zaporizhia, donde infraestructuras civiles fueron golpeadas. Hay poca esperanza en un alto el fuego, pero claro que toda la población quiere que Donald Trump presione a Vladimir Putin a aceptar un encuentro con Volodymyr Zelensky.
Bien, Emanuel Chas, nuevamente muchísimas gracias por la información desde Ucrania. Buena noche para ti. Y el presidente estadounidense Donald Trump y su homólogo ruso Vladimir Putin en un encuentro histórico en Alaska que ya inició. Pero no es la primera vez que ocurre un cara a cara entre ambos mandatarios. Samuel Salgado Castro nos hace un recuento de los encuentros previos entre Trump y Putin.
Esta fue la última vez que Donald Trump y Vladimir Putin estrecharon sus manos. Ocurrió en 2019 durante la cumbre del G20 en Osaka, Japón. 2 años después, el 16 de junio de 2021, un encuentro entre Putin y el entonces presidente estadounidense Joe Biden se inmortalizaría como la previa de un descarrilamiento de las relaciones Washington-Moscú. La invasión a gran escala de Rusia a Ucrania en febrero de 2022 congeló las relaciones bilaterales entre la Casa Blanca y el Kremlin, pero no entre Donald Trump, irritado por haber perdido la reelección ante Biden en 2020, y Vladimir Putin, a quien Biden insultó y calificó de loco y asesino. El carácter y las animadversiones en común de Putin y Trump pareciera unirlos. El líder estadounidense conoció al ruso en 2017 en una cumbre del G20 en Alemania, durante su primer mandato como presidente. La pareja se volvió a reunir más tarde ese año en Vietnam durante una cumbre de cooperación económica Asia-Pacífico APEC, antes de otras 2 reuniones al año siguiente en Finlandia y Argentina. Un total de 5 encuentros que, junto a denuncias de una supuesta injerencia rusa en las elecciones estadounidenses de 2016 a favor de Trump, provocaron críticas en Washington de que el republicano era blando con Putin. Pero su relación no deja de ser ambigua. Trump se ha jactado al decir que ningún presidente estadounidense ha sido más duro con Moscú que él. Ahora, Donald Trump intenta mejorar las relaciones con Rusia y tratar de poner fin a la guerra en Ucrania, aunque sin esconder su frustración con Vladimir Putin.
Se trata de un encuentro entre 2 gigantes que muchas veces han sido comparados con similitudes. ¿Qué diferencias, por favor, Zaira, dinos acerca de los 2 gobernantes puedes tú distinguir que alguna vez se les llamó amigos durante la primera campaña presidencial de Donald Trump en sus personalidades, pero también qué diferencias hay y se marcan en su manera más bien de gobernar, Zaira?
¿Diferencias en relación a Vladimir Putin y Donald Trump?
Así es, entre los 2 mandatarios.
Sí, bueno, hay ciertas diferencias, pero hay muchas similitudes. Y en especial, ambos son partidarios de todo este bagaje histórico, ¿no? Sobre lo que es Estados Unidos, ¿verdad? Lo que fue y ya no es por culpa de unas políticas equivocadas de los demócratas, ¿no? Por eso vemos este movimiento de MAGA, ¿no? Hacer América grandioso nuevamente. Y básicamente lo mismo lo vemos en Vladimir Putin, porque cuando toma el poder en 99, es cierto que Rusia estaba en una situación muy difícil entre crimen, corrupción y decadencia y una inestabilidad política económica que había afectado a toda su población. Es Vladimir Putin quien toma una serie de decisiones, algunas de corte dictatorial, ¿verdad? Otras también pragmáticas para recibir el apoyo de la población, como son estas reformas de tipo social que había mencionado en mi intervención anterior, que beneficiaron grandemente a la población rusa, ¿no? Mejorar, ¿verdad?, la infraestructura pública y los servicios sociales. Pero por otro lado también el norte de Vladimir Putin era esta idea de devolverle a Rusia, ¿verdad?, su legado imperial y su lugar en el mundo como una de las potencias y una de las naciones más poderosas y más exitosas de la humanidad. Así que en ese sentido tienen ambos estas similitudes, ¿no?, en la forma en que se proyectan y la importancia de la historia para ellos. Y en relación a Vladimir Putin, la guerra de Ucrania tiene mucho que ver con ese discurso, ¿no? Porque él considera que Ucrania, y no solamente Ucrania, sino el vecindario de las regiones que fueran parte de la Unión Soviética, tanto en Asia Central como el Cáucaso, como Europa del Este, donde todavía tiene mucha influencia, considera que estas partes tienen, estas regiones, estos territorios y estas repúblicas soberanas hoy en día deben estar siempre alineadas con Moscú, ¿no? Deben ser parte de su esfera de influencia. Uno podría hacer la comparación de cómo los Estados Unidos pues siempre ha sido muy celoso en la intervención de Rusia en Venezuela, la intervención de ciertos grupos de Irán, ¿verdad?, de la presencia de China en las inversiones económicas en Latinoamérica, ¿no? Porque considera a Estados Unidos en el 2025 que todavía Latinoamérica sigue siendo una esfera de influencia donde ellos tienen que mantener el control. Claro, esto ha cambiado muchísimo, pero todavía sigue siendo parte de una filosofía norteamericana y uno lo puede ver en las conversaciones con los diplomáticos estadounidenses en territorios latinoamericanos. Así que yo veo esas similitudes, ¿verdad?, en esas formas de devolverle la gloria a estados que ambos consideran lo habían perdido, ¿no? Trump, desde su punto de vista de que Estados Unidos había dejado de ser una potencia económica porque China se había aprovechado de él, porque también sus aliados europeos no habían tenido tratados justos en relación a la OTAN, donde Estados Unidos pagaba más de lo que otros aliados europeos pedían, donaban o contribuían, ¿no? Así que en ese sentido uno ve esas similitudes, esa filosofía de recuperar la grandeza. En términos de la forma en que operan, pues Vladimir Putin es un hombre orquesta, ¿no? Él tiene el control de todo lo que sucede. Y en ese sentido Donald Trump me parece que puede delegar más. Tiene también una serie de grupos a los cuales él tiene que responder, ya sea aquellos que favorecen el conflicto de Israel y Gaza a favor de Israel, ya aquellos que son MAGA, ¿no?, que apoyan, ¿verdad?, la lucha anti-inmigrante que se está llevando a cabo. Él tiene unos intereses que proteger, hay unos grupos que lo han apoyado, que lo han ayudado a llegar al poder y que él tiene que tener, como quien dice, tiene que saber cómo manejar ciertos asuntos. En el caso de Ucrania es uno de ellos. La población que votó por él, que es aquella que es del grupo MAGA, está en contra del despilfarro de dinero y de la inversión que se hizo en la guerra de Ucrania. También muchos de ellos han sido muy críticos en la forma que Estados Unidos ha apoyado a Israel. Así que en ese sentido Putin no tiene que darle cuentas a nadie. Y ahí estriba la gran diferencia en lo que va a ser la negociación del día de hoy. No obstante, sí quería mencionar que aunque hablamos mucho de las sanciones y de que tal vez Rusia no está tan afectada por las sanciones, no podemos olvidar de que hay una población rusa y también una población ucraniana que está cansada de la guerra. Y yo creo que de adentro hay ciertos movimientos que están poniéndole presión tanto a Zelensky, pero también a Vladimir Putin. Y en ese caso me refiero a una élite, ¿verdad? Una élite en Rusia que en cierto momento momento se benefició, ¿verdad?, de la apertura comercial que había en Rusia y de la posibilidad de invertir en otro mercado, y que se le ha truncado. Así que yo creo que hemos hablado mucho de las sanciones y de cuántas más sanciones se le pueden dar, se le pueden imponer a Rusia, cuánto más va a afectar su economía, pero también tenemos que tomar en cuenta que a pesar de que la vida no ha sido afectada grandemente, tampoco hay muchas posibilidades de desarrollo económico para Rusia. Está muy limitado, ¿no? Está en un estancamiento hasta cierto punto. Y yo creo que dentro de Rusia hay ciertos sectores que van a influenciar para que Vladimir Putin pueda, ¿verdad?, poner un fin a esta guerra de Ucrania. Y creo que eso habría que verlo de forma más detallada, ¿no? Y para culminar, no olvidemos que alrededor de 1 millón a 2 millones de rusos se han ido de Rusia al empezar la guerra, y muchos de ellos son parte de un capital social, ¿no? Es decir, son parte de una élite intelectual, muchos expertos en tecnología que ahora están trabajando para otras compañías, y eso también afecta la economía y el futuro, ¿verdad?, el desarrollo económico de un país.
Claro que sí, Lucas. Y ahora, en medio de estas negociaciones, surge también la pregunta de si Donald Trump participa con Vladimir Putin como un par o más bien como paria.
Wow, vale, pues depende mucho de cómo los percibamos también en política exterior, ¿no? A ver, en términos de como de poder puro, digamos, si estuviéramos haciendo un análisis como realista muy clásico, pues prácticamente son pares, ¿no? Porque pues ambos son dos de las grandes potencias. Bueno, si incluimos a China son 3 potencias, pero son 2 miembros del grupo de grandes potencias del sistema internacional, ¿no? Creo que si intentamos bajar el nivel de análisis otro poco, y más bien lo que intentamos observar no es exactamente como qué tanto peso tienen en el sistema internacional, sino más bien qué tanto peso tienen, digamos, casi que en las relaciones políticas de más bajo nivel, o relaciones políticas personales, incluso locales, digamos, dentro de sus propios países. Yo noto una diferencia fundamental que puede hacer que en algunas ocasiones Trump inclusive sea visto como un personaje un poco más, ¿cómo decirlo?, un poco menor con respecto a Putin en algunas cosas. Putin, por ejemplo, da la impresión de ser un tipo muy serio, ¿no? Y de intentar hacer una política internacional como muy sesuda, como muy estratégica, como, digamos, muy pausada, muy de paso a paso. De hecho, por ejemplo, hemos visto que muchas veces Putin intenta manipular interpretaciones bastante cuestionables del derecho internacional a su favor cuando da interpretaciones sobre cómo funciona la costumbre internacional sobre el uso de la fuerza en el derecho internacional en público y cosas por el estilo. O también lo vimos hoy, que en lugar de viajar directamente a la base militar en la que iban a ocurrir las negociaciones, decidió hacer varias paradas más cortas y más pausadas en otros lugares de Alaska, cosa que el gobierno de los Estados Unidos le permitió, para intentar dar una impresión de calma, ¿no? En cambio, Trump opera de una forma un poquito distinta. Trump opera de una forma un poco más, en algunos casos incluso azarosa, digamos, es decir, opera de una forma que a mí me gusta llamar la espectacularidad del poder. Es decir, de alguna manera Trump es muy como un poco como los reyes franceses del 1500 y del 1600 en ese sentido, porque lo que intenta hacer es demostrar incluso con formas muy espectaculares, muy mediáticas, muy televisivas del poder, intenta mostrar que él tiene el poder sobre las cosas. Entonces, una situación que es una demostración de esto, pero que nada tiene que ver con Ucrania en este momento, es el hecho de que hace unos meses, cuando estábamos hablando nuevamente de la crisis migratoria en Estados Unidos, hace ya más de 6 meses, de hecho, poco después de que asumiera el cargo como presidente, vimos que empezó a poner los carteles con las fotos de varios migrantes que habían entrado a los Estados Unidos de manera, entre comillas, ilegal, en las cercas que están alrededor de la Casa Blanca, ¿no? Como para decir, mira que estas son las personas que estamos buscando. Esa es una cosa que Michel Foucault efectivamente llama la espectacularidad del poder, porque de alguna manera lo que estás haciendo es, de nuevo, estás montando espectáculo para que la gente crea y tenga la impresión de que tú tienes tanto poder que inclusive puedes mostrar el rostro de las personas que el Estado está persiguiendo sin repercusiones reales, porque lo que ocurre con el poder es que el poder es muy frágil, es decir, el poder se va tan rápido como su uso. En el momento en el que lo usas y en el momento en el que dejas de mostrar la fuerza del poder del Estado, la gente deja de tener la impresión de que el poder del Estado está ahí. Creo que Trump es inconscientemente sabio de este asunto. Él sabe que el poder es es una cosa que se tiene que usar de forma relativamente constante para que la gente tenga una cierta cantidad de respeto sobre ti, pero esto sobre todo ocurre cuando los mandatarios o cuando los viejos reyes del 1600 en Francia tenían la impresión de que realmente su poder iba a acabarse. Entonces es por eso que estoy intentando decir que Trump en ese sentido puede ser visto como un líder incluso un poco menor, ¿no? Porque en las acciones cotidianas que hace es visto como particularmente emocional, muestra que se pone de mal humor de forma relativamente fácil, utiliza mensajes con letras mayúsculas y con muchos puntos de exclamación y sin puntuación de otro tipo en redes sociales y cosas por el estilo. Es decir, intenta mostrar todo el tiempo que él curiosamente no tiene sus emociones bajo control, y de hecho intenta inclusive ganar favor de la población civil precisamente mostrando que sus emociones no están bajo control. Es decir, intenta echarle más leña al fuego sobre la ira de la población civil, él también mostrando su propia ira.
Sí.
Y eso también tiene que ver con este uso espectacular del poder que él maneja, y es súper distinto a Putin en eso.
Bien, pues les agradezco muchísimo que nos hayan acompañado a lo largo de esta transmisión especial y les agradezco en especial por su análisis, por supuesto, a Zaira Badillo y también a Lucas Daura. Hasta la próxima.
Muchas gracias.
Y antes de finalizar, informarles nada más que a la delegación rusa la acompaña el ministro de Finanzas en efecto, Anton Silvanov, y también el ministro de Defensa ruso, Andrei Belousov. Esto para completar los equipos que negocian en este momento un acuerdo probablemente para el cese de hostilidades en Ucrania, o que por lo menos ese es el objetivo final. Muchísimas gracias a todos por su compañía. Hasta la próxima.
France 24 evoluciona en el mundo digital. Cobertura en directo al alcance de su mano. Ediciones especiales. Noticias 7 días a la semana, 24 horas al día. France 24.
Atención inversionistas inmobiliarios. El primer edificio en Miami con alquileres diarios tipo FlexShare, Vida Edgewater Miami, está casi agotado.
Exactly all of Russia's demands to secure all of Russia's long-term goals here when it comes to its war in Ukraine. And that's not just territory. Territory obviously is part of it, but it's also about neutrality for Ukraine, permanent neutrality and limits on its armed forces. And he will be trying to convince Donald Trump that the quickest path to peace is a deal on those terms, because he has no intention of backing down on the battlefield, so the hope is that Donald Trump will agree with him and then give Ukraine that kind of terrible dilemma. Either you accept these terms that you've cooked up with Moscow, or we're going to withdraw support and you go it alone, and Ukraine will have to then face that choice. But I don't think Vladimir Putin thinks it quite like that. He will have to go into these negotiations offering the appearance of concessions, because Donald Trump will want to be seen as smoking chief, seen as the one who is calling all the shots. And Vladimir Putin will know he can't lose face here. The American president must have something to show from this summit. So I think he will offer him something. We'll have to see what that is. Donald Trump has talked up the prospect of a meeting between Vladimir Putin and Vladimir Zelensky, second summit after this one, perhaps involving Trump as well. Saying that could happen potentially very soon. I think that's probably wishful thinking from Donald Trump, because Vladimir Putin sees Zelensky, he doesn't see him as an equal. He sees him as an illegitimate leader, kind of like a governor of a Russian province almost. And that's why he steadfastly refused to meet with Vladimir Putin. And I can't see him walking around the world as a not be a good look for Putin, it would be a sign of weakness. But I think he might offer the loose promise of a meeting, undoubtedly kind of lots of strings attached, but it could give Donald Trump something to show from this summit, or there could be other things, bigger things, that feed into the bigger geopolitical picture, like a new nuclear arms control treaty between the US and Russia. Russia, that gives them something to point to say, yes, look, we do want peace in the broad sense. And for Donald Trump, it gives him something to take credit for in his kind of desire to try and secure the Nobel Peace Prize and to cast himself as this great peacemaking president. So there'll be these other things that the Russian delegation will be kind of putting on the table, sweeteners to kind of tempt Donald Trump with, distract him from what's happening in Ukraine, to say, look at all the business and other things we could get done in the event of better bilateral ties between us if you started us in Ukraine.
Yes, I think very much. It's interesting since we've been in Anchorage that you do see people, or you hear people around Anchorage talking about the visit of President Putin, and Arthur Kellner, correspondent, was out and about yesterday talking to people, and some people were saying they didn't want President Putin here, and these are pictures of a small protest that is taking place today against, well, it's pro-Ukraine. It is a pro-Ukraine protest, as you can see from the flag. And as I say, there are people who are upset about this visit to their city of President Putin. Not here, of course, is the Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky. Donald Trump says he will be at the next summit as long as today's meeting goes to plan. Mr. Zelensky says the US President needs to adopt a strong position in today's talks, and says even as the leaders made their way here, the attacks on his country were continuing.
The war continues, and it continues precisely because there is no order nor any signals from Moscow that it is preparing to end this war. On the day of the negotiations, they are still killing people, and that speaks volumes. Russia must end this war. It started and has dragged on for years. The killings must stop. The meetings of leaders is needed. At the very least, Ukraine, the US and Russia must meet in this format for effective decisions to be made. Security guarantees are needed. Lasting peace is urgently needed. Everyone knows the key objectives.
Let's speak to our international affairs editor, Dominic Blank, who is in Kyiv. And Dominic, there's no question about it. President Zelensky is clearly very upset not to be involved in this summit.
Yes, he's very upset to not be at the table, but to his country's future to be very much on the menu. And his fear is, and his advisors and Ukraine's fear is that their country is going to get gobbled up into Vladimir Putin's plans for a greater Russia, that he may well further in this meeting, this extraordinary meeting with Donald Trump. To give you a sense, and I'm sure you can imagine, Mark, the social media in Ukraine has just been lit up with fury, anger and disgust at what they're seeing in Ukraine. Different ways of welcoming there will be to this kind of event, and Donald Trump has gone all out to give a huge welcome to Vladimir Putin. I think that's obviously sticking in the core of Ukrainians. One person on social media, on Twitter, on Facebook, sorry, we've been monitoring Facebook here, says he occupies territories, he destroys entire cities, he kills, rapes, robs, kidnaps, tortures, and as a result, he receives a red carpet welcome on Twitter. Jones says there's the world's war criminal, number one war criminal, a key figure behind currently the world's largest war, the most brutal European war of aggression since World War II, ends up like this, blazed into oblivion and received as an emperor on the US soil. His tweets are a picture of an extraordinary image of that in the back of Cadillac One, sitting alongside Donald Trump, winning his head off. And he says, of course, he couldn't be more rewarded and encouraged to go on with his wars and mass murders. And yet, kids looking at these pictures of him walking down the red carpet. Now, he's someone who invaded Georgia in 2008 and killed thousands of people there. He invaded Crimea in 2014. avenged the deaths of many others, got involved in Syria where his forces bombed hospitals, killed many others there. And yet he's in this situation now. You surely can't believe his luck, particularly given that a few weeks ago he was looking at the possibility of not going to I think the only sort of caveat mark to this is I think at an official level, it's happening all over. And then it hasn't even changed in 100 years. Stuff that happens every 100 years. It's been 70 years since this happened. European allies, which it is that it is clear Donald Trump is walking away from Ukraine. That is
or they had somebody
and
we were talking about the America will never take my care. It will
be under no illusion that America's backing away from supporting Ukraine. America's scary as hell. It seems much more common cause in Ukraine. And whatever comes out of the summit, that is something right now. We're hot skipping to jump away from Russia to support them, whatever America does. I think the other point, Mark, looking at these pictures, is it raises the stakes anyway. Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump is saying that here it's very hard for Russia to back down anyway, because you've got the media that says the media at home are getting a milking this for, but also for Donald Trump. He has to now make sure that Vladimir Putin does not benefit from this. His reign of massive advances on eastern fronts of Ukraine, for instance, Russian forces get through and start advancing heavily, then these pictures are going to look very bad for them. And if peace is not made, progress towards peace is not made, or a kind of peace is made, and then in a few years' time, Putin comes back for more, these pictures will
we are not asking for charity.
So he does have to make progress now.
We are asking for the opportunity
some substance behind his
taxes.
How he does that is we want to be the differences not from Arthur and from Ivan.
Even if temporary fixes that in some neighborhood that will do right.
An American president who wants to make
it will not solve any problem.
Who is sincere about absorbing Ukraine into Russia. That is a huge diplomatic challenge for the Americans to try and if they are sincere intent to do so.
Not knowing whether
yes, well, I mean, you say that Trump is walking away from Ukraine. He would argue, I guess, that he is prepared to get tough. He said he's prepared to get tough if Putin's not serious in terms of sanctions and rearming Ukraine, even if it means European countries buying those arms. So that would be, I assume, what Donald Trump would say. Just finally, Dominic, I mean, we know that President Putin is a master of these things, a master of manipulation. Presumably, he's going to be working hard here in Alaska to cast Zelensky as the intransigent one. Just very briefly.
Yeah, I think so. I think that's going to be one of his main objectives here, is to come up with some kind of agreement with Donald Trump that makes it look like he is pursuing peace. He's obviously not going to agree to an immediate ceasefire. He believes he is winning this war. In particular, this week, his forces have made some surprising but he does have to look like he is trying to pursue peace. He gets himself into a position where Zelensky has to say no to whatever comes out of this, and therefore the Russians can then say that the Ukrainians are the problem. That may be very unfair, but that will then help them to make this argument not just at home or in the world stage, but also amongst their sympathizers in America. And there are many of those in the MAGA movements, amongst podcasters and others supporting Donald Trump, who want him to move on from the war in Ukraine, however it turns out, because they see that as a threat and something that's consuming American money and potentially could cause a nuclear war. That's how they operate. At least they want the Americans to move out of Russia with the Russians. And so Vladimir Putin has to make this, contrive this, the outcome to make it look as if Ukrainians if peace is not pursued. He's a clever manipulator, very adept in those things.
indeed. And in the building where the meeting is taking place, there are preparations underway for a news conference later on after those talks. We've been talking for over an hour now. As we keep saying, the Russians predicted it could be 6 or 7 hours. We simply don't know how well just to say they are underway. We've been talking for more than an hour. We're going to take a break, and when we come back, I'll be speaking to Daniel Freed, the former U.S. ambassador to Poland.
For human rights violations against our allies. We must. It is incumbent upon us as Alaskans to use our voices to advocate for peace and justice and to stand together against any form of oppression. I haven't been able to hear I'm going to continue to try. Okay, I completely understand, no problem. I want to say that we are going to head over to the front and drive, walk, however you want to get over there, and we're going to unfurl one of the largest Ukrainian flags in the world. That's going to start at 1:30. I have no idea what time it is. But that's going to start at about 1:30. And so we need all the help we can get.
Some anti-Trump protests that are happening as well in Alaska. But for more on this, I want to go into the latest Fox News update.
Trump says he's confident Russian President Vladimir Putin is ready to make a deal on a ceasefire, but he's managed expectations, saying he's prepared to walk away if Putin doesn't agree. President Trump coming face-to-face with Russian President Vladimir Putin in Alaska for the first time since the start of his second term. The two leaders greeted each other on the tarmac at Elmendorf Air Force Base before beginning a sit-down aimed at ending the war in Ukraine. President Trump says the goal of these talks is not to broker a peace deal on behalf of Kyiv, but instead to get Putin to the negotiating table.
To stop the killing.
Ahead of the summit, the president said both sides will need to reach an agreement on territory before ending the war. Right now, Russia occupies nearly 1/5 of Ukraine's land and is pushing for more.
The war continues precisely because there's no order, nor any intention that Moscow is preparing to end this war.
And if Putin does not make concessions soon, there could be severe economic consequences.
He really does want to avoid these tariffs and sanctions. And if the president dropped them,
then that doesn't end the process.
Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky was not invited to this summit, but Trump hopes today will open the door for the three leaders to meet very soon. In Anchorage, Alaska, Connor Hansen, Fox News.
So far here in Anchorage.
Well, we haven't witnessed much. This is the beginning. You can judge this meeting by how it ends and what happens after, not the beginning. The burden is somewhat on President Trump to show that he got something by inviting Putin to Anchorage. Putin was strutting in his own kind of unmastered way. And Trump, having invited him here under the questionable premise that Putin was ready to make a deal on Ukraine, now has to show that he, Trump, has pushed Putin into a more reasonable position. If he gets a ceasefire out of Putin, that's great. My guess is that Putin is putting some shiny object on the table, some enticing offer, maybe on arms control, maybe on business deals, maybe on Ukraine, but I would look very hard at the details of any offer from the Russians on Ukraine before running with it. Because Putin is a master of obfuscation, deception, deflection, and I think Trump's job is to nail it. To use the considerable leverage that the United States has to push for a ceasefire, to push for steps to end the war, and that it means security for Ukraine after a ceasefire. We'll see. It's possible there'll be some progress made, but
they like coffee there more than Alaskans
we're just sitting here waiting.
What's that? Estonians like coffee more than even Alaskans do.
The lineups of the two sides of the negotiating table here. You have a very experienced team with President Putin, a team that has sort of done it all before diplomatically, and you've got on the other side of the table a Gulf friend property developer, Steve Witkoff, and you've got Marco Rubio and one or two others, I assume. What do you make of the contrast between the two lineups?
Secretary Rubio from Senator Rubio knows the issues. He's got experience in foreign affairs. Steve Witkoff, the special envoy, is new to this game. And his background in real estate prepares him for many things, but not all things. So Rubio, though, is smart enough and knowledgeable enough to tell whether Putin is making a real offer or a fake offer. And I think Trump is aware that if he is suckered by Putin, or appears to be suckered by Putin, that nothing good will come of it.
Yeah, and do you think Rubio is brave enough to actually tell President Trump what he thinks?
I think that in the context of the meeting, Rubio is certainly able to either interject or send a note to Putin or let it be known that Putin is joking Trump around, because if Trump is played by Putin, if Rubio doesn't do his job, which is to back up his president, then nobody will look good on the U.S. side. And I suspect that Trump is aware of that. I think his language in the last few days has been not bad. He has suggested that the burden is on Putin. He has stopped pushing Zelensky, who really isn't the problem. The problem is Putin. And Trump has made it clear that he's prepared to increase the pressure on Russia. Now, look, I understand that Trump, ever since he took office again, has tiptoed up to the line of more pressure on Russia and then always backed off. And he can't keep doing this without a real loss of credibility. And this is a moment where he has to put up or shut up unless Putin gives him something that will stand up. And that's what we're waiting to find out.
Do you think that Donald Trump
we've seen Donald Trump walk up to the line and not yet deliver. So the burden is going to be on him to show that he can. He has options. There are plenty of viable options to increase the economic pressure on Russia, and those options involve working with the Europeans. But going after Russian oil revenue is something we could do. There are several ways to do it, some risks involved, but there are some practical ways forward. And if Putin offers something, Trump can hold those sanctions in reserve. If Putin doesn't offer anything, or if what he offers is a mirage, Trump really needs to lower the hammer on Putin for his own credibility. And if there's one thing Trump hates, it's being seen as a sucker or being played or being weak. So that's what's on the line. And I think Putin knows it. The question is whether Putin is going to be so arrogant that he brings about his own downfall by alienating Trump and putting Trump in a position where he really wants to step on board, or whether Putin will come up with something clever enough to once again escape the pressure, and if he does, will Trump hold him to actually deliver? Will Trump push for something real? Those are all the questions. Nobody knows the answers to those things
Yet. We may well find out later. Daniel Freed, appreciate you coming on the program. Thank you very much.
Thanks for having me.
And James Matthews is with the White House delegation. And James, I don't know whether you could hear that we were talking about the two contrasting teams with the two presidents, and I just wonder, what are the White House saying about this criticism of Trump's team, that it is inexperienced and lightweight compared to the Russians? Because the White House has been saying, look, Donald Trump has a unique way of doing things, he is a unique negotiator, and give it time and it may work.
From the man himself, don't we? Donald Trump, in the past 24 hours, has spoken about that interaction and the dynamic between him and Putin. He's been in this game a long time, he said, but so long time. Well, actually, he hasn't. I mean, this is his second term as a president, of course. And he has been in the company of Putin in the past. He has interacted. Putin has made a career of playing the long game as a politician, of taking advantage politically, geographically, in the case of Ukraine. So Donald Trump actually relatively doesn't have much experience of Putin and how to get the best deal with Putin. I know people who have dealt with Putin, UK people who are involved in Secret Service, and they tell me that Putin and people like him, they need experience, and that takes decades to sit down with the likes of Vladimir Putin and just get to know them, even on a friendly basis. Get to know, when they tell you the truth, get to know when you can smell the BS, and that just takes interaction over time, getting to know somebody. It's the same in any relationship, I suppose. Up front, if Putin's all smiles and promises you the earth, then at face value, on the first meeting, you'd probably take that. I think it's genuine. It will take you, a few interactions to realise actually that's just him playing a game. So I think that's where we are in terms of how to handle Putin. It does take experience, more experience, I would suggest, and others who are in this game and just, a handful of meetings over a handful of years. Because that's what I think Trump is something that I just said is a lot of experience. In terms of the team that he has got with him, they are of varying ages, varying levels of experience, varied backgrounds in terms of their careers, their speciality, and there are a few of them that when I look down the list. First of all, who are far over 40 years of age, but few who have engaged in not just the diplomatic process, but also the process of dealing with an ex-KGB and that has caused problems in the process. I think the previous guest on there, she was interested in terms of business of Putin or Trump rather having to show strength, and that of course is correct. Trump cares about that. He wants to emerge with swagger, muscular US president leader of the free world. He may not be allowed to do that because of the deal that it's going to up to politics. You know what? Would be with strength and bringing down the hammer on Ukraine because he can't manage it with Putin. That would be a worst case scenario. They're being presented with a deal that Ukraine is bringing down the hammer on Ukraine. Of the free world, I've got bigger interests, and just leaving Ukraine and European allies to it, walking away, of course. Putin would draw that
Yeah, okay, James, thank you very much. Slight sound issue there. I apologise for that. But we can speak now to the former commander of the UK's Joint Forces Command, General Salir. General, good evening, thanks for being with us. Do you see any possibility of the outline of a deal emerging from this summit?
It's extremely unlikely, given that there's no real indication either side knows what the outcome of this current meeting is going to be. There's a lot of speculation and there's no script. So I think the best we can hope for is that it doesn't go wildly wrong, and perhaps it does begin to pave the way to more substantive discussions, particularly including the Ukrainian route.
If they're going to lose land, it's very easy to lose Donald Trump's land threats and so forth. I assume the most important thing then for the Ukrainians is this whole idea of security guarantees. What do you think those security guarantees should be?
I think the first point is at the minute Russia is sitting on 20% of Ukraine, and everybody understands that Russia isn't about to abandon that 20%, and Ukraine has not got the military means, even with a lot of help, to aspire to take it back by force anytime soon. So if there is a ceding of territory, it might be a recognition of current empires, but I think in no sense is Ukraine going to accept that land is lost to it forever, and that will then condition the nature of the relationship that comes off the back of any ceasefire. And we want to be very careful what we mean by the word guarantee, because if Europe is invited by Mr. Trump, perhaps on the back of today's conversation, to guarantee a ceasefire to contribute to the deterrence of Russia, then that deterrence has to be backed up by a credible ability to fight, both capability and intent. Otherwise, it's not a guarantee. And I fear that guarantee is a word that is too easily tossed about.
Is just right off over to the side. I'll get a white
well,
balance
this is my
too
point.
for all you
Is the only real security guarantee
standing up here, but
the Americans
again, over to my right side, your left side, my team is in that little alcove for
be willing
audio
to be part
video
of
and everything, and they can assist you if you guys are having some issues.
It's important that
and we can
America
try to
is
resolve
connected
it.
to guarantees
Also,
in
just to let everyone know, for
parts
those
of
that
three
don't,
ways. The
our
first
volt
is
are,
right now only
output
American
is mic
defense
level,
industry
so
can
mic
provide
level on the
the
volt
quantity
output,
and the types of
just to
weapons
let
that
you know.
Ukraine needs
And again,
in
this
order
is,
to
speaking
continue
from
to fight
the,
on the battlefield.
Russian
And if the Russians and whether it's the US providing those weapons to the likely, or much more likely, European taxpayers to the tune of about $40 billion a year paying for it, then that's important. The second thing, and it's just as important, is the main way of deterring Russia from coming again if there's a ceasefire, or continuing if there isn't a ceasefire, is by wearing down its economy, which is beginning to break, and that is about meaningful sanctions imposed on oil, and that comes at a cost to Europe and the US. So we need the US to be forced to go behind a much sharper sanctions regime. And the third element is political. We need the American weight on Russia to say that this has to stop. this is the deal, and you will comply.
So what are you going to do? Vladimir Putin has said he's against Western forces going into Ukraine to monitor any ceasefire. But he would say that, wouldn't he? Do you see any role at all in Ukraine during the ceasefire?
So as I understand it, that conversation is already pretty advanced, and that British forces are likely to do, at the minute, three things. One is contribute to the security of the Black Sea. That's a job for the Navy. The second is to train the new Ukrainian army, and that training will probably occur in the west of Ukraine, so further away from the front lines, but still in Ukraine. And thirdly, in the way that I don't think it's completely certain to find that, to help police Ukrainian airspace. But we're going to come back to this critical question, which is if the ceasefire, should there be a ceasefire, exists, it's going to be very fragile, and both sides will expect the other to break it. So what happens when the ceasefire breaks? Does the UK armed forces simply say, well, the ceasefire is broken and we're going to leave? Or are the UK armed forces going to be part of reasserting the ceasefire? And that means, if necessary, using force against Russian elements in some way. We need to be really careful.
Yes, and one other point. It's being reported that Putin and the Russians want the whole of the Donbass. They don't have that at the moment. The Ukrainians have, I think, 16, 18% or so. And it seems to be a critical area for the Ukrainians. They have defensive positions there, they have troops there, and they are holding that quite successfully. Do you see any scenario in which Ukraine would willingly pull out of that area?
I absolutely do not. Russia claims to have annexed the 4 eastern provinces of Ukraine. It doesn't occupy anything like all of that territory, and it doesn't even occupy the 2 provinces of Donetsk and Luhansk. And I think Ukraine is almost certainly never going to see that territory, because well, it would yes to Russia, but also it would cede to Russia territory that made it much easier for Russia to relaunch their offensive at some point in the future, because the Ukraine would have given up some heavily fortified positions. So I think the conversation about a ceasefire has to start with where the line is now and see if you can adjust it one way or another. But there aren't going to be that sort of concession. And as I said, even if Ukraine is forced to accept it can't take the territory right now, it will still think that in the future, even if it's decades, it will get its country back.
And just finally, General, in 30 seconds or so, if there is a ceasefire, and I mean, who knows how it's going to work, but if positions are frozen and the ceasefire takes effect, do you think it's inevitable that down the line President Putin comes back for more?
So there's nothing inevitable, but the point is Europe economy is 12 times the size of Russia, so frankly it's ridiculous that Russia feels it has that option. We need, as Europe, looking at this to make it clear that this is only it will be to its massive costs.
Okay, General, thank you very much. Where the 2 men there, President Putin and President Trump, have been talking about for 2 hours. They met there as they came out of their respective aircraft, and President Putin, well, he got the red carpet treatment, as you can see. They're meeting as we speak with their delegations, and we don't know how long those meetings will go on. The news briefings is planned after those talks. Much more.
Hear that whistle and that crunch? We know that they're coming from the south of the city where there's a column of Russian army. I'm Alex Crawford at Iron Skies, special correspondent based in Istanbul.
Of flakes, and that has happened within minutes, and now it's coming from both sides. gives you the very best of Sky News. Great videos, analysis, 6 podcasts, watching us live, joins us live all in one place, and all at just the touch of a screen. The Sky News app. Get the full story first.
It's 10 p.m. in the UK, 1 p.m. here in Anchorage in Alaska. I'm Mark Austin with special coverage of the meeting between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin. An historic handshake. Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin greet each other at a US military base here in Anchorage.
Yeah, this is the English channel. This is the English channel. This is the English channel. Going to the Russian channel.
The two leaders will see if the
This is the English channel right now. This is the English channel. This is the English channel going to the Russian channel.
The beast, but Vladimir Putin seemed to enjoy his ride in Donald Trump's presidential limo.
Mr. Putin, will you commit to not killing any more civilians?
But the Russian leader faced difficult questions from the start as journalists demanded answers from Putin on the slaughter in Ukraine.
English will be on this channel. English will be on this channel. You need any more tests, or you're happy, or what's the... Okay, English. Okay, great.
Good evening. History has been made in Alaska as Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin come together to see if it's possible to bring peace to Ukraine. The leaders landed in their respective planes at the Elmendorf-Richardson military base, around 30 minutes apart. Trump landing first in Air Force One. The US president was first down the steps, and then he made his way onto the red carpet, connecting from each plane and meeting in the middle, ready to greet Putin. Facing his opposite number, President Trump applauded the Russian president and greeted him rather like an old friend who made his way across for a handshake. Face to face, 6 years after their last meeting. The meeting here in Anchorage was organised just days ago, but the work behind the scenes appeared to pay off as they followed the red carpets in full view of the world's press. Reporters shouted questions as the men stood on top of the podium and posed for photos in Anchorage, with one journalist, as you heard there, asking the Russian president if he will stop the killing of civilians. The two presidents then made their way towards Mr. Trump's presidential limo, despite Vladimir Putin's Urus limousine sitting on the tarmac. The Russian president seemed to enjoy his ride in the nicknamed the Beast. Mr. Trump waved to the crowds as the car departed, while Mr. Putin was seen smiling. Each president has two aides beside them in the talks, with the Russian side saying the talks could last for several hours, perhaps 6 to 7 hours.
Mr. Putin, will you agree to a ceasefire? Mr. Putin, will you commit to not killing any more civilians?
Once inside, the two men again ignored the questions from journalists at the start of the talks. Putin appearing to be in good spirits, cupping his hands as if he wanted to give an answer to the questions. And so the talks began, and it's now 2 hours and counting. Let's speak to Ivor Bennett, our Moscow correspondent, who's with the Russian delegation, and also to James Matthews, our US correspondent, who is with the American team. And James, to you first. Extraordinary images, those on the red carpet at the air base. And broadly speaking, Donald Trump seemed in positive mood before the talk.
Yeah, positive mood It is no wonder. I mean, this is a man, the aggressor who began the Ukraine conflict, who has increased it in its intensity in recent days. A man with blood on his hands who was feted upon his arrival here. Nothing less than the red carpet. Donald Trump appeared to applaud him when he touched down on the tarmac, and of course we had that very warm greeting, the smile, the handshake between the two men who hold peace in their hands. Then of course that walk towards the media, and Vladimir Putin playfully giving a deaf ear to very serious and pointed questions about a ceasefire, about when would he stop the killing of civilians. Donald Trump took him away from that particular awkward moment in nothing less than Cadillac 1, the Beast. It's a very rare spectacle. Anybody else bar the president gets in the back of that particular vehicle, but it was a treat afforded to Vladimir Putin, and he was smiling from ear to ear. So there clearly is a warmth between these two individuals. They bore the appearance of old friends, and you have to ask about the optics of it all. We will certainly be asking questions about the way this looked in Ukraine, because it suggests a power dynamic that, you know, is unequal. Very much certainly reflects Donald Trump's well-known reverence for Vladimir Putin, to the extent that it was almost deference. There followed a media scrum, as they call it. You know, several journalists in front of Donald Trump sitting side by side with Putin. We're very familiar with that exercise, and of course it's normally a situation in which Donald Trump takes charge. He is the silver back in the room when these kind of situations arise. Not this time. Not sitting side by with Vladimir Putin. There were questions shouted by press very close by. And again, Putin almost playfully dismissed them. It was, you know, if Putin didn't give Trump the message about no questions beforehand, I think his silence at that point certainly communicated to Trump that that's not something he wanted to entertain. And rarely, the first time that I can remember, actually for months, Donald Trump took no questions before the media as they posed for that photo call. So that sets the scene for this meeting, Mark. And I do wonder about the tone of it all, the look of it all, and how that translates to a meeting in which Trump will have pointed questions for Vladimir Putin. He was talking tough prior to going in, saying that he would be walking out if he didn't get the answers he was after. You know, how does Donald Trump nail Vladimir Putin to the wall? Because that didn't look like the kind of dynamic that we saw on the tarmac at this airbase. But they're talking. It's not one-on-one. That was the suggestion early on, but it's actually 3-on-3. Trump is in the special envoy Steve Witkoff and his Secretary of State, Marco Rubio. So there'll be a 3-on-3, then there will be a pause, and then the larger delegations will become involved on a range of subjects, of course, far beyond Ukraine, business, financial opportunities, and so on.
James, thank you very much indeed. Let's join Ivor Bennett, who's with the Ukrainian delegation. And Ivor, from what we've seen, many smiles from President Putin, and no surprise really, because Donald Trump has come along and dragged him out of the diplomatic deep freeze.
You're absolutely right, Mark. The only other countries that I have seen greet Vladimir Putin in this way in the last three and a half years since Russia invaded Ukraine are Moscow's closest friends, the likes of China, Mongolia perhaps, and North Korea. But it looked like Russia had just gained another friend here, because the body language here on the tarmac of Elmendorf Air Base was the body language of bromance. And this is exactly what Vladimir Putin wants, of course. It is a meeting of equals, a meeting of great powers, and a chance to carve up Ukraine without Ukraine being in the room. And Vladimir Putin, remember, has secured this summit without seemingly doing anything at all. This time last week, Donald Trump was threatening to impose sanctions on Russia. He was sanctions, but all of that pressure has just melted away.
A lo que es la agenda ucraniana, por ejemplo, creación económica, explotación energética conjunta, todos con respecto a que es un tema que los reúne a los dos en interés, caso en el cual Ucrania pasaría a una segunda, a un segundo escalón de prioridad, priorizando justamente la agenda positiva de Donald Trump, muestra que algo ganó, a pesar de que Ucrania quede librada a su suerte.
Bien, pues le agradezco muchísimo por su análisis al profesor Juan Alberto Rial. Gracias. Hasta la próxima.
Un gusto. Hasta pronto.
Y en otro orden de ideas, la presidenta de México, Claudia Sheinbaum, y el mandatario de Guatemala, Bernardo Arévalo, participaron de un encuentro bilateral en Petén, al norte de Guatemala. Ambos dialogaron sobre temas comunes y el fortalecimiento de la agenda bilateral, con foco sobre la seguridad fronteriza. Nuestro corresponsal Andrés Suárez Jaramillo estuvo en el lugar y nos amplió la información.
The idea is to portray the US and Russia as two neighbors who have a lot to gain, both sides, from better relations between the two of them. The one party that could lose out, of course, is Ukraine, because Vladimir Putin here will be trying to convince Donald Trump that the quickest path to peace there is a deal on Russia's terms, and he'll be trying to sway the American president to side with him on Ukraine by tempting him with all these other benefits that could come with better relations from Russia. And the hope is that Donald Trump agrees and then gives Kyiv a choice: either agree to a peace deal on these terms or go it alone without American support.
Ivor, thank you very much. Well, the Ukrainian President, Vladimir Zelensky, is not here in Anchorage, of course. Donald Trump says he could well be at the next summit as long as today goes to plan. Mr. Zelensky says the US president needs to adopt a strong position in today's talks and says even as the leaders made their way here, the attacks on his country from Russia continued.
The war continues, and it continues precisely because there is no order nor any signals from Moscow that it is preparing to end this war. On the day of the negotiations, they are still killing people, and that speaks volumes. Russia must end this war. It started and has dragged on for years. The killings must stop. A meeting of leaders is needed. At the very least, Ukraine, the US, and Russia must meet in this format for effective decisions to be made. Security guarantees are needed. Lasting peace is urgently needed. Everyone knows the key objectives.
Well, let's speak to our international affairs editor, Dominic Waghorn, who's in Kyiv. Dominic, how have the scenes at the airbase, President Putin's arrival and warm welcome from President Trump, how have those scenes gone down in Kyiv?
Well, it's pretty late at night, Mark, so nothing on the streets, but on social media, Facebook, Twitter, other platforms have been lit up with fury and anger and disgust at what the Ukrainians have seen in Alaska, as you can imagine. It was an interesting moment, wasn't there, when the Russian plane came in. It didn't park itself next to the steps, the mobile steps that the American military had laid out at the airbase for Vladimir Putin to walk down. And so the American military had to push that further forward to connect it with the plane, but also to push the red carpet to the steps of those mobile steps. And to do so, the American soldiers had to sort of bend down and unfold the red carpet. Now, the image of that, of American soldiers on their knees at the foot of Putin's plane steps, has gone viral on Ukrainian media. On one page, I've seen it saying, make America great again, ? And I think that sort of sums up sort of visually how Ukrainians are seeing this. They are seeing this as Donald Trump being very deferential and kneeling down at the steps, if you like, at the feet of the man he seems to be honouring with a red carpet welcome to America. So there's a sense of disgust, but I don't think great shock here or surprise, because this is an American president who has accused their president of being at fault, of being responsible for the invasion of their country. They've seen Donald Trump order his diplomats to vote for Russia. He has seemed extremely sympathetic to the Russian side of this war, if not openly supporting it. And I think at an official level, the Ukrainians will be saying to their European allies, this is a sign of what is to come. And I think James is correct there to say that this idea that Donald Trump could go into this meeting now and within a few minutes say, right, that's it, clearly you're not serious about peace, and walk away. Something he did do in a similar way with Kim Jong-un, of course, in their second summit. That is clearly not going to happen. All the mood music is that this is going to be a long summit and Donald Trump is going to listen to Vladimir Putin. They seem to be meeting very much as equals in this encounter in Alaska. I think the Ukrainians will say to the European allies that this is further sign that Donald Trump is walking away from Ukraine. He may carry on supporting Ukraine in some respects, but he's not going to give them the kind of support that they have enjoyed under Joe Biden. That's been very clear. And he does seem to want a relationship with Russia apart from and regardless of what is happening in Ukraine. And therefore, they will say to the Europeans, you may be appalled, like we are, by these scenes you're seeing in Alaska, but you have to step up to the plate even more than you are doing and realise that security in Europe is your responsibility, and you must do more to support and defend Ukraine. And I think the problem, of course, is Europe. That penny is dropping in Europe, but not fast enough, and the Europeans are not filling the vacuum that they expect to be left by the Americans fast enough at the moment. And there's a jeopardy there, and in that vacuum there's a possibility of the Russians making more advances and furthering Putin's aim. So there's a huge amount of jeopardy in this. But I think some diplomatic opportunity for the Ukrainians to say to the Europeans, you've got to do more to support us. America is going in a very different direction. The direction of travel, at least, in this diplomacy is deeply worrying for both us, but also for the entire continent.
Yeah, and Dominic, just bring us up to date with what's going on on the battlefield. President Zelensky talking about these Russian attacks even as the two presidents were heading to Anchorage. But I was also reading this morning about Ukrainian attacks and destroying a Russian vessel carrying drones.
Yeah, there are two things, Mark, going on. There was what's happening in the air, but also on the ground. So on the ground, the Russians have made a surprise advance, 15 kilometres or so, a kind of finger of advance that they have made in the east, on the eastern front. The Ukrainians say they have kind of got that contained, and they've made a lot of the kind of way they've pushed back against that. And some claims that they've kind of cut off that finger and captured a number of Russians. None of that is verified yet. I think it is safe to say they are in some trouble, the Ukrainians, and they didn't expect this advance. And the fear is that they can't hold this front line with the Russians. They don't have the manpower. That is an ongoing concern that could get more pressing, I think, for the Ukrainians. On the other hand, they do seem to, in the last few days at least, have prevailed more effectively against the Russians in the air than the other way round. So there was this devastating attack on an oil refinery, a Lukoil refinery in Volgograd. We spoke to the commander of one of the units responsible for that drone attack, a long-range drone attack on this oil refinery, one of the biggest hits yet the Ukrainians have pulled off against the Russians. That refinery refines 5% of Russia's oil, so it's a devastating attack. The Russians can rebuild it, but every time this happens, they're in more difficulty. They have to divert resources to their oil industry. And the Ukrainians want to see Donald Trump hit Russia's oil industry with sanctions. He's not prepared to do so, although he keeps threatening to do so. So in the meantime, they have to use their drones that they're getting better and better at using these drones to hit Russia's oil installations. But also, as you say, they hit a ship in a port in Astrakhan that they say was importing Iranian drone parts and ammunition. So that drone war goes on and on. It's a kind of arms race. Every time the Ukrainians get better at it, the Russians find ways of countering it, and vice versa. But the direction of travel on the ground is, I think, more worrying for the Ukrainians, more encouraging for the Russians. And because the Russians have a greater scale in terms of what they can throw at the front, particularly in terms of manpower, this is an ongoing and more pressing concern for the Ukrainians.
Okay, Dominic, thank you very much. Our US correspondent, Martha Kellner, is here with me. And what do we have any update about how these talks are going, how long they may go for? What do we know?
I mean, no real update in terms of what they're discussing, if any progress has been made. But we do know that smaller meeting, which is between the two presidents and their closest aides. So on Trump's side, it's his special envoy, Steve Witkoff, his so-called peace broker, and his foreign secretary, his Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, and alongside Vladimir Putin, his foreign secretary, Sergei Lavrov, and another close aide. We know that is still ongoing. They've now been in that room for almost 2 hours. So, you know, Donald Trump said he might walk out in the first 2 minutes. It seems like he's not done that. So at least some progress must have been made. He must still feel invested in those talks to a level. After that smaller meeting has concluded, Donald Trump will be joined by more members of his staff. We know that Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent will be there, his Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick will be there, also Chief of Staff Susie Wiles and Defence Secretary Pete Hegseth. So that will be the bigger group.
That suggests a kind of broadening of the conversation as well, doesn't it?
Yeah, and that will please the Russians. You know, they want to divert talks away from Ukraine and towards business interests. You know, they know that Donald Trump is a deal maker at heart, and they hope to appeal to him on issues beyond Ukraine, on possible trade deals, on arms deals, on, you know, nuclear weapons, climate change even. And the presence of those two people, Scott Bessent and Howard Lutnick, the Trade Sec and the Commerce Sec, will please the Russians. They'll want to have them in the room because that will mean that they can broaden the conversation away from Ukraine.
And the risk here for Trump is that he is seen to be, you know, getting played by Putin. And the White House has been rejecting that, you know, over the last few days and saying Trump knows what he's doing.
Yeah, I think, you know, fresh in people's minds still is, you know, that 2018 meeting in Helsinki. We've talked about it a lot when Donald Trump was very much seen to have been played by Putin. And I think people see these pictures of Putin arriving, the red carpet quite literally being rolled out, you know, of the pomp and ceremony of Trump applauding Putin and smiling at him, and the coziness really between the two men. And they think, is history repeating itself? Is Donald Trump about to be hoodwinked by the Russian president once again? The White House at pains to say that is not going to happen this time round, that Trump is going into this with his eyes wide open.
Yeah, well, I was in Helsinki. It's very interesting, but there was much made of the two men just being on their own with their interpreters, and that you know, but Putin was able to get you know, on top of Trump in terms of the conversation about Russian interference in 2016 election and so forth, and there were these sort of sharp intakes of breath when Donald Trump appeared to side with President Putin against his own agencies. I wonder whether, I mean, whose decision would it have been this time to say, right, we're not going to do that, they're not going to be on their own, they're going to have these advisors with them. It's quite interesting, isn't it?
I think Donald Trump's team will have pushed to be in that room, or to have at least a couple of people in that room with him. I don't think they wanted a situation where Putin was alone with Trump and could really control that conversation. We know that Putin can talk for hours and hours on end. He can deliver history lessons, and you know, he has the ability to bend Donald Trump round to his way of thinking. So I think it offers some form of insurance policy for Trump to have those other two men in the room. Although, as we've been saying, you know, Steve Witkoff is not an experienced foreign policy man. He's, you know, a real estate developer and a lawyer. This is all new for him as well. I think people would prefer to see perhaps a more wily operative in the room alongside Trump.
And it is worth pausing here just to remind ourselves of how extraordinary these images are. The Russian president climbing into the beast, Donald Trump's presidential car, in animated conversation, smiling out of the windows, red carpets for President Putin, and then they go off in front of the press and, you know, they smile and they don't answer any questions. And I mean, these are remarkable pictures that happen this morning. Interestingly, no pictures so far of the groups, you know, of advisors in the talks that are underway.
Yeah, we've not seen them for a couple of hours, but they are remarkable pictures, especially that image of Vladimir Putin climbing into Donald Trump's own heavily armoured limousine, the Beast. You know, this is extraordinary to witness. You know, even friends are not invited inside that car. To see an adversary, someone who is wanted for alleged war crimes by the International Criminal Court, being extended that courtesy of a private ride-along with the US president. And that, in fact, was probably the only one-on-one time that they will get today. I'm told that there was no interpreter even in that car with them. Vladimir Putin clearly speaks good enough English to hold at least a limited conversation with Donald Trump. Interestingly, there was, they're slightly out of shot there, but alongside the red carpet, there was the 4 F-22 fighter jets that were lined up alongside it. I'm told that those are actually the same planes that often intercept Russian aircraft operating off the coast of Alaska. So I don't know whether that was perhaps a nod to American strength and you know, the fact that this has not always been, you know, as close a relationship as these images would indicate. These are foes at heart, you know. Yeah,
and foes in the Arctic. The choice of Alaska is interesting because of what's happening in the Arctic and the, you know, climate change causing more shipping routes, which allows countries to get closer to the resources that are there, and this real battle going on in between not least Russia and the United States, China involved as well. But Putin has been, you know, working very hard at building up his, you know, icebreaker fleet and so forth. And it's irked Donald Trump because he's mentioned on a couple of occasions how he wants new icebreakers and all the chat about Greenland.
Yeah.
So it's an interesting choice of venue, not least because of the rivalry between these two men and these two countries.
Yeah, Donald Trump said earlier this week, you'll find out why this location is very relevant. You know, geographically, it kind of makes sense. It's roughly halfway between the two capitals, Moscow and Washington, D.C. But yeah, you know, there's been talk as well of Alaska's rare earth minerals being on the table as a potential incentive for Vladimir Putin to agree a ceasefire in Ukraine. I think there's this idea that whereas Trump uses the stick with Vladimir Zelensky, he very much uses the carrot with Vladimir Putin. He feels like he's got to offer him some form of incentive to come to the table when it comes to getting a peace agreement with Ukraine. The way he deals with the two men is very different.
Absolutely. Martha, thank you very much. We can speak now to Finland's former foreign minister, Pekka Haavisto. Thank you very much for being with us. First of all, what do you believe is at stake here at this summit?
Well, of course, this is an opportunity for a peace process to start, but quite a lot is on stake because I think Vladimir Putin already have achieved some of his goals by stepping on the ground of the US, being treated very well there and so forth. It looks, of course, when you think of the background of the war situation, this is quite incredible.
And do you think there's any indication at all that President Putin has given up on these regional ambitions and that, you know, he could well have a greater foothold in Ukraine as a result of these talks? How concerned are you in Finland about this?
Well, of course, we are concerned, and actually the whole week has been spent to liaise with the United States and President Trump in a way that he gets very clear message, not only from Ukraine, but also from the European partners, that this is not the time to give up, or this is not the time to make compromises over the red lines of Ukraine. And of course, the best possible outcome would be that this starts a process where Ukraine is part of, which Europe can support and so forth. But of course, it's up to Ukraine to negotiate, and nobody can negotiate over the head of the Ukraine.
It's interesting that Donald Trump, on his way here to Anchorage, said on Air Force One, he said, Europe can't tell me what to do. Do you think that Donald Trump is listening to European leaders?
Well, I think to a certain extent he is listening. If you compare the treatment that President Zelensky got in the Oval Office earlier in the spring and in the autumn and spring, and then what the treatment that he has now got from the US and somehow more sympathy shown to the Ukrainian case, I think this is a remarkable change in the US position. And of course, there are many figures who have made a lot for this. Senator Graham has done a lot and so forth. And I think the change of the attitude is there, but is this a permanent change, and will this bring final results of the peace process? It's too early to say now.
Yes, of course. Do you think President Putin is serious about wanting a ceasefire?
Well, I think this, of course, the bilateral talks between US and Russia gives him an opportunity also to raise all possible other topics, the economic topics, economic cooperation, nuclear issues, other conflicts, the global Middle East, whatever. And there are certainly common interests of US and Russia on some of these other issues. So if this will be a 6-7 hours meeting, I'm sure that these topics will be discussed, and probably Russia and President Putin can fulfill some other goals that they have in their bilateral relationship with the United States. So this is something that remains to be seen.
Do you see a ceasefire emerging from this meeting, or do you think it's going to be a much more protracted process?
Well, of course, in a peace process, it's usually the devil is in the details, and it's maybe too early to make the final judgment on this issue. And for the ceasefire, you definitely need the Ukraine at the table. So maybe the next step, if we are lucky, would be to have a tripartite meeting where Russia, Ukraine, and US is present, maybe with the support of Europe, and that could then bring the ceasefire. But only when the ceasefire is there, you can start real peace talks, and it's about the land, it's about the borders, it's about the Ukrainian security, it's about the prisoners, it's about the children who have been kidnapped and so forth. There are a lot of details then in the final peace process. But of course, if there's a ceasefire, then maybe the role of Europe, the role of the OSCE can grow in giving, of course, from the European side, some kind of security guarantees, hopefully together with the US, and then maybe some observers from the OSCE for observing the ceasefire. These are maybe the positive trends that could follow from this meeting.
Pekka Haavisto. Yeah, Pekka Haavisto, thank you very much for coming on the program.
Thank you.
So it is an extraordinary day, extraordinary pictures, an extraordinary welcome for President Putin from Donald Trump. And right now the talks go on. All eyes are on this room where eventually the two leaders will be speaking, or we think the two leaders will be speaking. Donald Trump has said he will certainly have a news conference afterwards. No commitment from the Kremlin, but it looks likely that could happen. When, we're not sure. The talks go on with their two each foreign affairs advisors. They have two foreign affairs advisors each with them at the moment. And there are broader talks also planned. So how long this goes on, well, we wait and see. We'll have more full coverage on this, remarkable day after this break.
States. We're the only Arctic state making the United States an Arctic country. We only have about 730,000 to 35,000, depending on who's the governor. And our population for the whole state. Anchorage, our largest city, has only about 230,000 people. It is the second most diverse city in the whole country. We have many Ukrainian refugees settled here. As the farthest western Union, we're often referred to as the last frontier. However, in reality, we're the first frontier of climate change. Climate change caused by fossil fuels and the legacy of extractive that few people and land purely as monetary resources. How surreal and how heavy it feels that Trump has called the we condemn the legitimization of war criminals. Russians who came over here into Alaska in 1741 and ravaged the people. They had the land and the fur and oil-bearing animals, feeling that they had exhausted the state's resources. They stole the right to occupy Alaska in 1867. If you do not know, there was no just war or peace symbol title by Russia. Russia is actually a Alaska.
Time for peace.
It's true.
The Mail points out that the Russian president shrugged when asked if he'll stop killing civilians. The Eye says the Russian military is preparing to test what's described as an invincible nuclear missile, but that British forces stand ready to assist in Ukraine if a ceasefire deal is reached. As well as boots on the ground, the Telegraph reports that RAF jets could patrol the skies above Ukraine, while the Mirror places the talks alongside today's commemorations for the 80th anniversary of VJ
Russia has been the United States enemy for a very long time. Even now, in the news, Russia was just
joining me now is the American diplomat Kurt Volker, former U.S. Special Representative for Ukraine. Thank you very much for being with us. First of all, what do you make of the scenes that we witnessed at the airbase today?
There's a little bit of testosterone in the world, I think. We have gradually showing up wearing the USSR sweatshirt. We have the B-2 bomber was flying overhead.
Let's be honest.
And it even pointed out to me that Trump's red carpet was wider than Putin's red carpet. So I think there's a lot of symbolism in all of this. Trump is trying to say we're strong, we're powerful, we need us. I think that the Russian side is trying to become a superpower just like you. And in reality, we're going into this discussion. Both of them are trying to dangle economic incentives in front of the other. Trump would like to get Putin to agree to a ceasefire first. Putin would like Trump to put pressure on Ukraine to give up. And neither one of them is going to get what they want. And so this is really just going to result in a promise to meet again.
Alaska is
right, so you don't see any dramatic breakthrough in terms of an announcement regarding a ceasefire. You see this more as a progression of diplomatic talks and meetings.
Well, that's even a kind way to put it. I think that what we're going to see is no ceasefire because Putin doesn't want it. And he would have extraordinary conditions that have to be met before he would agree to a ceasefire. But he might say, okay, in principle, Donald, I'll meet with Zelensky and you together. But even for that, the conditions have to be right, and those conditions aren't in place. He may say something like that, and that'll kick this issue down the road. Trump will keep pushing, but it'll just continue to drift as it is.
For the last wild caribou herd.
Yes, and the White House is answering this criticism of Trump's lightweight team, and the Russians have the more experienced foreign affairs team. The White House is saying, look, he's a unique negotiator, he's a unique deal maker, he does things instinctively, and that could all unsettle the Russians. What do you make of that?
Well, the White House is telling the truth. That he is a unique person. He does operate by instinct rather than knowledge and briefings and specifics. He's reading the people. He is getting his own gut interest, his own gut feeling about something. But I don't think that's going to rattle the Russians at all. I think it's something that Vladimir Putin looks at how he can exploit. Certainly he has more depth of knowledge. He has more discipline. He has more patience. He's willing to escalate. So I think Putin is always looking at how he can game Trump. Just think about the last 2 weeks. Trump had set a 50-day deadline for a ceasefire. Then he changed it to a 10-day deadline. Then the deadline came, and instead of doing what he said he would do, implying harsh sanctions, because Putin changes the subject as much as the meeting. And then the meeting in Alaska, and now the subject is not really the ceasefire. The subject is whether we agree to have another meeting, this time with Zelensky. So Putin has masterfully shifted the goalposts here.
Once again, thank you everyone
I read
for
out
being out
the
here today.
series of, or what we think is a series of Russian demands to a former Putin advisor today, and I said, look, those are all the demands. What is Russia prepared to give in exchange? What is Putin prepared to concede in exchange? And the former Putin advisor said simply nothing.
Yes, that's crystal clear. That's been obvious for months and months, if not years. And that's why it's important to put pressure on Putin, economically, politically, militarily, so that he starts to develop an interest in really ending the war. Right now, he's just putting out his maximalist demands and insisting that others go about trying to satisfy them.
So how long do you think Donald Trump goes along with this? How long does Donald Trump, well, does he have the patience for a long, protracted series of meetings? How long before he does, as he says he would, walk away and say, good luck with the fighting?
Well, I don't think he actually does that. I know he says he would do that because he thinks that sounds like a good threat. But I don't think he actually does that because it would make him look like a failure. And he will never accept not being able to do something. He wants to be seen as the only guy that can really do this and worthy of that million.
Thank you for supporting my race. These are the people
So how then, just a minute left, how then does Trump bring Putin to a position where he agrees to at least some sort of ceasefire?
I think the driver is going to be how many lives are lost on the battlefield, which the Ukrainians are taking, and how hard it is to sustain Russia's state budget. Right now, they're digging deep into their existing reserves, their state fund reserves. They can run out of those by the end of the year if oil prices stay low, and if it is more and more difficult for them to sell their oil and gas in world markets. Ideally, the U.S. and Europe would help accelerate that process by slapping on the secondary
and I love to see you here. You are amazing. You are the future. And their sign pretty much, their signs pretty much say everything. The first one says Alaskans against fascism, and I think we can all agree with that.
Kurt Volker, I appreciate you coming on. Thank you very much indeed.
There's a president right there. This one's going to be president.
To our U.S. correspondent James Matthews,
and the second one says,
with
hate
the American
never
delegation
made
for us. And James, you heard
because we all know that love, not hate, makes America great, right? Say it with me. Love, not hate, makes America great. Love, not hate, makes America great. Love, not hate, makes America great.
You know, how long does
Let's do this.
Donald Trump
Let's do this.
go along
I am
with this?
so
He
excited.
says, well,
I
he
can't
has to,
believe
because
we pulled
otherwise
this
it would seem
together
to be failure.
in what, 3
It's an
days?
interesting point.
Y'all rock my side. Alaskans will get done, okay? Yeah! And when our democracy is under attack,
what do we do? That's right, stand up, fight back!
Thank you, everyone. This flag today here is not just fabric. It is a symbol of freedom, resilience, and unity. Putin and Trump may not see it from the sky, but the world will. And we together stand with Ukraine. I want to extend a very special thank you to United Help Ukraine and to Stand Up Alaska for making this all possible on such short notice. We have this 132 by 65 foot flag that has been flown up from New Jersey on quite a few flights to be at this event today, and thankfully it made it just in time. Now, I would like to get to a few ground rules. Well, really no ground rules, so really the whole goal here is to have the flag off the ground at all times. We're going to be unfurling it at about waist height, and what we'll do is start from the west side over here and move east. What we'll do in the beginning, those firmly at the start line is a few flowers and a peg will pick the flag up and line it out in its short distance and move towards the east side at a very slow pace with people holding on, and please listen to my guidance as we're doing it as to not damage or destroy the flag. Also, just please make sure it does not touch the ground during this event. If you need any help, please raise your hand and say assist, and I'm sure one of your fellow citizens around you would be able to help you
the wider agenda that they will address
and lastly, we'll keep it open for about 15 minutes. We'll also have it open around 2 p.m. and get some photos from the north direction. So please have your signs facing this way. And on my mark as well, we will roll the flag up, basically exactly reversing the direction we just did. So from west
accordingly.
Interestingly,
Trump
east
comes
to
here.
west.
You know, he has been talking tough. It's a question of whether he
I believe
can
that is it. Glory to Ukraine.
The big worry, of
I will
course,
pass them
is that if he gets rolled over
Thank you all for being
by
here.
Putin to try to maintain the strength before Trump brings down the hammer on Ukraine, presents them with a deal that they find unacceptable and makes Trump walk away from supporting Ukraine.
Okay, James, for now, thank you very much indeed. And a short while ago, I spoke to Donald Trump's former national security advisor, John Bolton, who explained how the president gets himself prepared for such a summit.
Prepare because he doesn't think he needs to. He said in the past couple days several
All right,
times
can everyone hear me now?
he'll know within the first few minutes of this meeting whether there's a real prospect for peace. This is how he sees international relations through the prism of his personal relations with foreign leaders. He's thought for years that Vladimir Putin was his friend, but he's been quote-unquote disappointed with him in the last several months because Vladimir wasn't giving him the ceasefire that he wants, and he wants a ceasefire. Why? For the greater glory of Ukraine? No, he wants it for the Nobel Peace Prize. And so the dynamic of this meeting, in my view, centers around whether Putin can take his KGB training and make that magic work again, and get Trump to think that Donald and Vladimir are friends again, put off the sanctions that are being threatened, start talking about strategic arms limitation, maybe announcing talks beginning on the successor to New START very soon, talk about economic deals, talk about the U.S.-Russia bilateral relationship, fend off the sanctions, and keep things going in Ukraine.
Right, but do you think that Trump should
And that is a call for
granted
peace and
this
solidarity
meeting
and
to
peace.
Putin without getting anything in return?
Through the valiant efforts of United Help Ukraine organization, Doug, who is just speaking with us here, made several dozen calls trying to coordinate this in 48 hours, as well as to many local organizations who have helped raise awareness
against the
with
Russians that were imposed after that invasion. And as you say,
the Ukrainian flag is marked with a blue stripe on the top and yellow on the bottom.
for the privilege of doing
The blue
business in
represents the
America,
sky, often symbolizing freedom, peace, and the vastness of Ukraine. The yellow represents the golden wheat fields, symbolizing prosperity, wealth, and the richness of the land.
Once the ceasefire
We can
lines
see this
are
every
drawn,
time that we
there's
look
every
at the
risk
horizon.
that negotiations will be protracted.
This land and
that
sky
ceasefire line
will
be
always
the
go
new,
hand in hand.
border between
There would be no
Ukraine
sky
and
without
Russia
land
until
and no
Putin
land without
repairs
sky.
and rebuilds
It's
his
impossible
army
to
when he
separate.
invades for the third time.
The flag here today represents Ukrainian
So what
heritage,
you're saying, the
culture,
ceasefire
and
itself
people.
is not a mistake.
And
You're
now
saying
more
the
than ever, it
freezing
represents their freedom.
the front
When I look
lines
straight ahead
during a
and I see the
ceasefire, you think
horizon,
that's a
I
mistake.
see
You
this
should think
simple. And
they
like the land
should
and
be
sky, Ukraine can
forced
walk
to pull back. Do you?
Glory to Ukraine.
Well, if we had decided off course, if the U.S. and UK and NATO for the last 3.5 years have had a strategy to win
We'll
for
have Doug come back here
Ukraine, as
momentarily
opposed
to
simply
now
to a
discuss
strategy of making
logistics.
sure they didn't
We'll be
lose,
having folks
we'd be in a
who
different
will be
place now.
unfurling
But the
flag,
fact
and
is,
we'll also
I've
have
wondered
any
for
folks
some
who have
time why Putin
peaceful
doesn't want his
signs to
own
also show
ceasefire
up
to
at
repair the damage
top
that's
of
being
the flag,
done, to
so
get
that
the
way we'll have
sanctions
a nice
lifted, to
layout
get his
of people
economy
holding the flag,
back
as well
on
as
track again.
signage for
And
everyone to see.
that may
There
be
will be
his
some
plan
photos
B.
articulated
I mean,
on
there are
the buildings
various
over there,
ways
so
for
we just want
Putin to
to
come out of this
create this unified
successfully
and powerful
today.
statement
We'll
of
see
support
what the
for
end result is, of course.
Thank you all so much for being here with me today.
And when we do see what the end result is, whatever it is, do you think that Vladimir Putin will come back for more in the future?
Absolutely. He told us in 2005 at his address to the State Duma. He's told us several times since then he's trying to recreate the Russian Empire. And I think for those who have that point of view in Russia, and there are quite a few of them, you don't have a Russian Empire without Ukraine. So he achieved the success in getting 10% of Ukraine in 2014. He's up to 20% now. Maybe it's time for a pause, but he'll come back for more. That's why Zelensky wants security guarantees, and what I think many in Europe still don't understand, while Trump told them on Wednesday he's happy to talk about it, he's also said no NATO membership for Ukraine, no NATO security guarantees for Ukraine, and quite implicit in all that is no U.S. participation in security guarantees.
Mind if I get through?
Well, that's interesting.
Yes, ma'am.
And on that
Thank
point, if there is some sort of land deal, do you think, well, I mean, what sort of security guarantees do you think Putin would accept? He doesn't seem to be, at the moment, willing to accept any.
Yeah, I don't think he wants any security guarantees. He doesn't want to allow Ukraine to become strong and rebuild its own capabilities while he's rebuilding his. Look, one thing that's absolutely central here, to whether it's NATO or NATO members, coalition of the willing, giving security guarantees to Ukraine, is the continued flow of American intelligence. Now, Trump hasn't said anything about that. That may be a good sign. He doesn't want to talk about it publicly. But even if the U.S. sold military equipment to Europeans who then in turn passed it on to Ukraine, as is the case with the Patriot air defense batteries, without the intelligence we've been supplying, I think Ukraine is in trouble, and there's no indication Trump is willing to keep that going.
And we've got about a minute left. Just, I'm wondering what your thoughts are about the way this summit ends, what emerges from this summit.
Well, I think that anything they can announce as a deliverable that permits Trump not to reimpose sanctions or add sanctions to the likes of China will buy time for Putin. So one deliverable that he sort of indicated yesterday, Putin did, how about an announcement that the two sides are going to begin immediate negotiations on the successor to the New START treaty? That's a real U.S.-Russia bilateral question. I don't think it would make sense, but it may help both of them find something they can say to declare this a success.
That was John Bolton, Donald Trump's former national security advisor, and the talks are still going on, about 2.5 hours and counting now, and there is the suggestion of both the presidents being involved in a news conference afterwards, and that room has been prepared. There it is, and we will have full coverage of all that at the top of the hour.
I'm David Blevins, and I'm Sky's Senior Ireland Correspondent. I've spent 30 years reporting the journey from conflict to peace. The end of the political stalemate, the start of a new chapter for Northern Ireland. Catholics and Protestants now facing the same threat.
Contract COVID-19 religion stuff.
Sky News, the full story first.
Fire, shouts the commander. There's a dash to safety. We've now got to wait inside the shelter to see if there is incoming. I'm Deborah Hain, Sky Security and Defence Editor. Should Russia's war with Ukraine escalate significantly, pilots like these could be called upon to go into combat for real.
Yes, ma'am.
It's 11 p.m. in the UK, 2 p.m. here in Anchorage, Alaska. I'm Mark Austin with special coverage of the meeting between Presidents Trump and Putin. An historic handshake. Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin greet each other at a US military base in Anchorage with peace in Ukraine top of the agenda. With the eyes of the world on them, the two leaders will see if the bloodshed in Ukraine stops. Nicknamed the Beast, but Vladimir Putin seemed to enjoy his ride in Donald Trump's presidential limo. The talks involve the two presidents and their closest advisors on foreign affairs. They've already lasted well over 2 hours.
Mr. Putin, will you commit to not killing any more civilians?
But the Russian leader faced difficult questions as journalists demanded answers on the slaughter in Ukraine. Good evening. History has been made here in Alaska as Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin come together to plan to see if it's possible to bring peace to Ukraine. The leaders landed in their respective planes at the Elmendorf-Richardson military base around 30 minutes apart. The US president was the first down the steps, and then he made his way onto the red carpet, connecting from each plane and meeting in the middle, ready to greet his opposite number.
We're good there.
President Trump applauded the Russian president and greeted him like an old friend as he made his way across for a handshake, face to face, 6 years after their last meeting. The meeting here in Anchorage was organised just days ago, but the world's press was there to see the two men as they followed the red carpet in full view of the cameras. The US Air Force put on a show as the leaders made their way down the red carpet together.
President Putin, will you agree to a ceasefire?
Mr. President, what's your message to Vladimir Putin?
Mr. Putin, did you underestimate Ukraine? President Putin, will you stop killing civilians?
Reporters shouted questions as the men stood on top of the podium and posed for photos in Anchorage, with one journalist, as you heard there, asking the Russian president if he will stop the killing of civilians. The two presidents then made their way towards Mr. Trump's presidential limo, despite Vladimir Putin's Urus limousine sitting on the tarmac. The Russian president seemed to enjoy his ride in the Cadillac nicknamed the Beast. Mr. Trump waved to the crowds as the car departed, while President Putin was seen smiling.
Press, thank you, press. Thank you, press.
Mr. Putin, will you agree to a ceasefire?
Thank you, press.
Mr. Putin, will you commit to not killing any more civilians?
And yet more difficult questions, though Putin appeared to be in good spirits, cupping his hands, as he wanted to give an answer. US correspondent James Matthews is with the American delegation. And James, well, 2.5 hours and counting. We're not sure they've even started lunch yet, and there may be more talks after that. This could go on for some time.
Thank you.
Yeah, we are reminded, aren't we, that the Kremlin predicted 6-7 hours of duration for this, and I don't know, seems to be heading that way. I suppose by Donald Trump's measure, Mark, we are relatively successful, or these talks are going well. He spoke about 2 minutes. He would know in 2 minutes if things were going badly, and then he would walk away. Nothing has happened of that sort. But of course, the arrangements have changed. It was billed, this meeting, as a one-on-one, a tete-a-tete with Trump and Putin only in the room with interpreters. That has expanded as we speak inside now, talking for, as you say, more than 2 hours. On the American side, certainly, is Trump, Steve Witkoff, his special envoy, and his Secretary of State, Marco Rubio. That will expand after a break into wider discussions with a bigger group. Scott Bessent, the Finance Secretary, Defense Secretaries from both countries, and others will be involved in wider discussions on economic opportunity. So, more than 2 hours in, things don't appear to be going badly, because we have not had the walkout from Donald Trump, if indeed that
is that really an Alpha 7-3
on the agenda.
A 7-3
I think what we have
nice
seen
camera.
over the course of this morning, Mark, has been extraordinary, astonishing, whichever adjective you wish to pin on it. I don't think anybody saw coming the kind of scenes we saw at the airport, with red carpet, with the fly past, with an honoured guest, a man, you know, who, let's face it, is the aggressor, is a pariah internationally, is an indicted war criminal, and yet he was given the fly past, the red carpet, the ride in Cadillac One, the beast. And, you know, Vladimir Putin was a man feeling the luxury, I thought, and feeling the love. That's what it looked like from the smiles. And they had the look of old friends, and the control that we typically see Donald Trump exert over occasions like this, when he is in the company of visiting dignitaries and so on. He's the strong man in the room. He will dictate who asks questions, who answers questions, and just generally how this whole situation unfolds. I think we got a sense of the strength of presence of Vladimir Putin when twice there were the two men stood and sat in front of a media gathering, were asked questions, difficult questions for Putin, about civilian deaths, about ceasefire, and neither man said anything. Indeed, Vladimir Putin smiled, pointed to the sky, gave that question about killing civilians a deaf ear. I think the question for Donald Trump is, will you ask him that same question across the table? Because that is the kind of tough question that goes to the very heart of this matter. That would certainly be the Ukrainian view. A strong US president is what they want to see in Kyiv and in European capitals, not a US president who shows reverence to Vladimir Putin and who rolls over. They will be suspicious that that's what they're going to get on the back of what we saw earlier today. Mark, I'm just going to turn around. There's some activity in the press room here, and indeed the press room is being opened up. Journalists are being allowed to take their seats for the news conference, which is an indication that things are developing. Quite what that means in terms of timing, we'll have to check, but there appears to be an element of progress here. Remember, even though the Kremlin was talking about 6-7 hours of a meeting, Donald Trump was always looking at 3-4 hours. That was the initial White House schedule. So perhaps we are closer to that than we are to the Kremlin's expectations.
Yeah, and James, before you go and grab your seat, I mean, what is clear is that Donald Trump is a man in a hurry. President Putin, his interests are in delaying and buying time. I guess pretty soon something will have to give.
You would think so, and it's a question of the extent to which Donald Trump feels the need to bring things to a head. We'll see what they say in this news conference, whether there is a clear sighted conclusion drawn. I think there's every chance that there will be some kind of holding statement, some kind of optimistic note struck by both, which of course will have to be relayed to Ukraine and European partners. The one in Kyiv will be that there is a fudge. It actually doesn't seem very close. Putin's success is in merely extracting more delay from Donald Trump. Remember, Trump went into this talking in general interest about his wish for a ceasefire. Said he wouldn't be happy if he didn't get one, but didn't say what he would do if that wasn't the result he got today. It's a question of the extent to which Trump wants to press Putin against the wall, give him a hard deadline, and a strong message that this must come to an end on Donald Trump's terms, if not necessarily on the full terms that Ukraine is after. That would bring about perhaps the breaking point, and you know, breaking point might well be ugly. Trump would have to make some hard decisions about how he preserves his stature and, you know, his muscularity on the world political stage. To whom does he target his anger, and to whom does he target with consequences? Does he target Putin, or does he take the option of targeting Zelensky, once again blaming him for conflict and taking a step back from Ukraine and Ukraine's interests, withdrawing the American security guarantee? That's the big question. And of course, it's a huge question for Ukraine, their president has already said that they absolutely need the US for a security guarantee, if that guarantee is to be worth anything at all.
James, thank you very much, and that news conference may be getting closer. Well, the Ukrainian president, as James was saying, Vladimir Zelensky, is not here, of course. Donald Trump says he could well be at the next summit, as long as today's meeting goes to plan. Mr. Zelensky says the US president needs to adopt a strong position in these talks today, and says even as the leaders made their way here, the attacks on his country continue.
I believe so.
The war continues, and it continues precisely because there is no order nor any signals from Moscow that it is preparing to end this war. On the day of the negotiations, they are still killing people, and that speaks volumes. Russia must end this war. It started and has dragged on for years. The killings must stop. A meeting of leaders is needed. At the very least, Ukraine, the US and Russia must meet in this format for effective decisions to be made. Security guarantees are needed. Lasting peace is urgently needed. Everyone knows the key objectives.
Our international affairs editor, Dominic Waghorn, is in Kyiv, and I spoke to him a little earlier.
Later at night, Mark, so nothing on the streets, but on social media, Facebook and Twitter, other platforms have been lit up with fury and anger and disgust at what the Ukrainians have seen in Alaska, as you can imagine. It was an interesting moment, wasn't there, when the Russian plane came in. It didn't park itself next to the steps, the mobile steps that the American military had laid out at the airbase for Vladimir Putin to walk down, and so the American military had to push that further forward to connect it with the plane, but also to push the red carpet to the steps of those mobile steps. And to do so, the American soldiers had to sort of bend down and unfold the red carpet. Now, the image of that, of American soldiers on their knees at the foot of Putin's plane steps, has gone viral on Ukrainian media. On one page, I've seen it saying, make America a great again, ? And I think that sort of sums up sort of visually how Ukrainians are seeing this. They are seeing this as Donald Trump being very deferential and kneeling down at the steps, if you like, at the feet of the man he seems to be honouring with a red carpet welcome to America. So there's a sense of disgust, but I don't think great shock here or surprise, because this is an American president who has accused their president of being at fault, of being responsible for the invasion of their country. They've seen Donald Trump order his diplomats to vote for Russia. He seemed extremely sympathetic to the Russian side of this war, if not openly supporting it. And I think at an official level, the Ukrainians will be saying to their European allies, this is a sign of what is to come. And I think James is correct there to say that this idea that Donald Trump could go into this meeting now and within a few minutes say, right, that's it, clearly you're not serious about peace, and walk away. Something he did do in a similar way with Kim Jong-un, of course, in their second summit. That is clearly not going to happen. All the mood music is that this is going to be a long summit and Donald Trump is going to listen to Vladimir Putin. They seem to be meeting very much as equals in this encounter in Alaska. And I think the Ukrainians will say to the European allies that this is a further sign that Donald Trump is walking away from Ukraine. He may carry on supporting Ukraine in some respect, but he's not going to give them the kind of support that they have enjoyed under Joe Biden. That's been very clear. And he does seem to want a relationship with Russia apart from and regardless of what is happening in Ukraine. And therefore, they will say to the Europeans, you may be appalled, like we are, by these scenes you're seeing in Alaska, but you have to step up to the plate even more than you are doing and realise that security in Europe is your responsibility, and you must do more to support and defend Ukraine. And I think the problem, of course, is Europe. That penny is dropping in Europe, but not fast enough. And the Europeans are not filling the vacuum that they expect to be left by the Americans fast enough at the moment. And there's a jeopardy there, and in that vacuum there's a possibility of the Russians making more advances and furthering Putin's aim. So there's a huge amount of jeopardy in this. But I think some diplomatic opportunity for the Ukrainians to say to the Europeans, you've got to do more to support us. America is going a very different direction. The direction of travel, at least, in this diplomacy is deeply worrying for both us, but also for the entire continent.
Yeah, and Dominic, just bring us up to date with what's going on the battlefield. President Zelensky talking about these Russian attacks even as the two presidents were heading to Anchorage. But I was also reading this morning about Ukrainian attacks and destroying a Russian vessel carrying drones.
Yeah, there are two things, Mark, going on. There's what's happening in the air, but also on the ground. So on the ground, the Russians have made a surprise advance, 15 kilometers or so, a kind of finger of advance that they've made in the east, on the eastern front. The Ukrainians say they've kind of got that contained, and they've made a lot of the kind of way they've pushed back against that. And some claimed that they've kind of cut off that finger and captured a number of Russians. None of that is verified. So I think it is safe to say they are in some trouble, the Ukrainians, and they didn't expect this advance. And the fear is that they can't hold this front line with the Russians. They don't have the manpower. That is an ongoing concern that could get more pressing, I think, for the Ukrainians. On the other hand, they do seem to, in the last few days at least, have prevailed more effectively against the Russians in the air than the other way round. So there was this devastating attack on an oil refinery, a Lukoil refinery in Volgograd. We spoke to the commander of one of the units responsible for that drone attack, a long-range drone attack on this oil refinery, one of the biggest hits yet the Ukrainians have pulled off against the Russians. That refinery refined 5% of Russia's oil, so it's a devastating attack. The Russians can rebuild it, but every time this happens, they're in more difficulty. They have to divert resources to that oil industry. And the Ukrainians want to see Donald Trump hit Russia's oil industry with sanctions. He's not prepared to do so, or he threatened to do so. So in the meantime, they have to use their drones, that they're getting better and better at using these drones against Russia's oil installations. But also, as you say, they hit a ship in a port in Astrakhan that they say was importing Iranian drone parts and ammunition. So that drone war goes on and on. It's a kind of arms race. Every time the Ukrainians get better at it, the Russians find ways of countering it, and vice versa. But the direction of travel on the ground is, I think, more worrying for the Ukrainians, more encouraging for the Russians. And because the Russians have greater scale in terms of what they can throw at the front, particularly in terms of manpower, this is an ongoing and more pressing concern for the Ukrainians.
Dominic Waghorn there speaking to me earlier. These are live pictures of the room where they are preparing for a news conference, and it does look well, a lot busier than it has over the last 2 or 3 hours. And we are hearing that certainly the 3-on-3 talks, the two presidents and each with 2 advisors, foreign affairs advisors. We're hearing those talks are over. The Kremlin has said those talks are over. And Martha Kellner is with me here. What's not clear is what about the other sort of 2 legs of this meeting, which was, we were told, a lunch was planned, and then these broad...
Техническая проверка. 121, 122, 123, 124, 125, 126.
For something.
Yeah, they're setting up those lecterns at the moment, which would indicate...
Oh, good day. Just double-checking our last-minute translation booths, making sure everyone is getting everything is needed. Again, you should be having English in your English-only modes. The floor will get both everything at the same time. On your headsets, it should be 004, 01 should be English, and 02 should be Russian on your headsets. So again, just doing a couple last-minute checks, making sure everything is going through as it should. Thank you. So again, just doing a couple last-minute checks.
Кремлевский пул, у вас все хорошо, все нормально. Камеры, покажите, пожалуйста, большой палец, что все нормально. Кремлевский пул, у вас все хорошо, все нормально. Камеры, покажите, пожалуйста, большой палец, что все нормально. Спасибо большое.
On your headsets, it should be 01 English, 02 should be Russian on your headsets. So again, just doing a couple last minute checks, making sure everything is going through.
It's interesting, isn't it, that that we were told there were these other talks that were going to take place. One wonders what's happened to those. But as you say, I mean, 2.5, 3 hours talks, that's much closer to the White House prediction than the Kremlin prediction, where they were saying this morning, well, it could be 6 or 7 hours.
I guess there is always the possibility that they come in, do this joint press conference, and then they break up for this extended bilat lunch, which was supposed to include Donald Trump's chief of staff, Susie Wiles, but also, and this is key, it was supposed to include 2 of his key business advisors, his Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent and Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick. The suggestion there being that it was going to expand talks beyond Ukraine to shared business interests, things like trade deals, arms deals, nuclear deals, climate change and that sort of thing. I guess the fact that the press conference is happening, it wouldn't usually follow that another meeting would happen after that. You would usually have both of those bilats before they appeared in front of the press. But there are so many unknowns. You know, this has all been put together so quickly with so little advance warning, so many questions about how this day would be choreographed. But yeah, certainly it looks like they're setting up for that press conference at the moment, and that both men will appear.
Yeah, I mean, it's probably not worth speculating on what might be going to happen, but we can talk about what has happened and those extraordinary images as the 2 presidential aircraft arrived here in Anchorage at the US air base, and President Putin and President Trump shook hands, smiled warmly. There was a fly past by American jets, and they both then, in probably the most remarkable picture of all, climbed into the Trump presidential beast, it's called, the Cadillac, presidential Cadillac, and headed off for these talks. They really were quite some images.
Yeah, I mean, for all the talk of this summit being cobbled together at short notice, Donald Trump will have thought long and hard about how that moment would appear on television. He is the producer of his own presidency, and we saw that in action. The red carpet quite literally rolled out, a salute from various members of the military that posed for photos at the end of the red carpet on the tarmac. Pointedly, neither man answering questions from journalists stood there. And as you say, this astonishing moment where Vladimir Putin jumped into Donald Trump's car with him for a ride-along. Interestingly, I'm told that President Putin's own car, his own limousine, was also at the airstrip waiting to collect him, to take him to the building where these talks are going on. But whoever's decision it was, whether it was Putin or Trump, he ended up in the car with him, which is quite remarkable for a friend even, but especially for an adversary to join Donald Trump in the beast. Not least a man who is wanted by the International Criminal Court, who not so long ago began that invasion of a sovereign nation. And I think those are the images which have appalled some people, certainly in Ukraine. People, they were expecting a level of warmth from Donald Trump towards Vladimir Putin. I'm not sure they quite expected to see him applauding the man who has invaded their nation. And interestingly, the White House put a video of that moment, that greeting from Donald Trump to Vladimir Putin. They put that on their social media platforms, but they began the video after that applause. That applause was edited out of the video, and that may have been a very deliberate decision that they've made there.
Yeah, that's interesting. And you can see there in the picture we have on the screen now of the room where this joint, as you say, joint news conference will take place. You see those words, pursuing peace.
Yeah.
And of course it's interesting because there is this debate about how serious President Putin is about pursuing peace.
Yeah, I'll be absolutely fascinated to see what questions, if any, Vladimir Putin decides to answer. I was speaking to our colleague Ivor Bennett, the Moscow correspondent, about this, and he said, often journalists in the Russian congregation are asked, by the Kremlin's press secretaries for detail, if not the exact wording of the question, at least a steer on what question they intend to ask Vladimir Putin, which is remarkable in and of itself. Will they have done that here, or will he answer some of the questions that he didn't answer earlier to the American reporters who were standing on the tarmac? He was asked, will you agree to a ceasefire? Did you underestimate Ukraine? How can the US trust your word? And most pointedly of all, I think, he was asked, will you stop killing civilians? Those are the questions that people here and across the world really want to hear answered. But will those reporters asking those questions be the ones called upon by President Putin?
Yeah, we're about to witness this clash of cultures because, as you say, these press conferences in Moscow, certainly this annual one I think he does, which goes on forever, I mean, that's largely because the journalists ask the question and then Putin just can answer without any interruption at all. And as you say, they're probably, carefully controlled who asks the question. You've got then the contrast with the Donald Trump brand of news conference, which are sort of develop into quite chaotic shouting matches with the journalists screaming their questions and trying to shout over one another. That, I would think, is not something that Vladimir Putin would readily welcome. One wonders whether in this situation there are a number of questions that have been, a number of news outlets have been given questions, which does happen and does happen in, news conferences in Downing Street and so forth. But it's a very different way of doing things.
Yeah, with Donald Trump, it's often a free-for-all. He freestyles his way through these press conferences. He calls it weaving, but actually it's often talking about a whole host of subjects with no real direction. I wonder whether we might see a different Donald Trump today, given that he will be standing beside the Russian president, but certainly fascinating to see how this press conference will play out. I'm sure James and Ivor, our colleagues, are in there and they'll be trying to get their questions to the two presidents. I also found it interesting, Ivor was telling us yesterday that the Russian journalists are often asked by Vladimir Putin to do COVID tests before these press conferences begin. Clearly none of the reporters in that room, or none of the US reporters, the international reporters in that room have done a COVID test. Yet we do expect now Vladimir Putin to appear on that podium with President Trump. Interesting as well with this delegation. I was saying we were expecting to see Donald Trump go to an expanded bilateral meeting, a lunch together with his Treasury Secretary, his Commerce Secretary, and his Chief of Staff. It now looks like that may not happen.
Yeah, and it's interesting, isn't it? I was just talking to James Matthews about how there's two contrasting sort of desires at the end of all this. One is Trump, which is to get on with things quickly. He wants a deal quickly and, could walk away if there isn't a deal quickly. And you've got President Putin, who is, the evidence shows, looking to buy time and drag things out and carry on fighting, because of course this summit has taken place without the condition of a ceasefire being imposed on President Putin.
Yeah, I mean, Trump likes a quick deal. He came into office promising to solve the Russia-Ukraine conflict within 24 hours. It's now 208 days into his second term. He will want to be seen here as the man who has, delivered peace and stability to Russia and Ukraine. But he's admitted that he underestimated how complicated the situation in Ukraine was and is, and he perhaps miscalculated as well what President Putin, was willing to concede. We've seen how his tone towards Vladimir Putin has shifted in recent weeks. He originally was, calling Vladimir his great friend, and then we saw him turn against Putin and announce these more severe sanctions. In fact, there was a set of sanctions that were supposed to come into action this week. Well, those have now been halted because of these talks that are taking place. But I mean, it will be fascinating to see how they interact after this meeting, whether there is an announcement to be made here or whether they, kick the can down the road and focus on these upcoming talks that President Trump has promised are going to happen with the Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky.
Yes, we are waiting for a news conference, a joint news conference with President Trump and President Putin after the talks which they have held here in Anchorage in Alaska went on for roughly 3 hours. We're still waiting for a precise timing on that, but those talks, we are told, have been completed. There was talk of lunch, there was talk of other advisors joining them for another session of talks, but it really does look as though if the news conference has been called and is going to happen, it does look as though the talks are over. Now, the interesting question is what progress has been made, if any, because that then leads on to this whole idea of a second meeting, which Donald Trump said was the important meeting with President Zelensky and President Trump and President Putin. He even mentioned talks with, involving European leaders as well. So it really, it'd be interesting to see if that is going to happen, where that's going to happen, if it's going to happen. Will President Putin rather, even sit down at the same table as President Zelensky? These are all questions that we may get answers to within the next hour.
President Putin doesn't even recognise President Zelensky as a legitimate leader. He does not recognise the state of Ukraine, so it would be a remarkable turn of events if he does agree to sit in the same room as the Ukrainian president. But yeah, Donald Trump saying that those talks would take place here in Alaska. Again, no timeline clearly for those, but that I'm sure will be a question that they're asked in this press conference. Interestingly, two of the men who were supposed to be in that expanded bilat that was scheduled for after the 3-on-3 meeting, the finance minister and the defence minister, they're now sat in the front row of that press conference audience, again indicating that these talks are now over and that expanded bilat perhaps is not going to take place anymore. We know that President Trump said that immediately after this meeting with President Putin, he promised that he would get on the phone to President Zelensky to deliver personally to him a breakdown of what they'd discussed, of what had been agreed upon. He then said he was going to speak to other European leaders. Who knows? Will that phone call take place immediately after that meeting, before this press conference, or will it take place after this press conference? Will the first that Vladimir Zelensky hears about those talks and about what has been discussed, will it be in this press conference, or will there be a phone call beforehand?
It was very interesting. Earlier on, I was talking to a former deputy prime minister, Russian prime minister, and talking to him about President Putin's attitude to Ukraine. And that speech that he made before the full-scale invasion of Ukraine back in February 2022, when he talked about the fiction of Ukrainian statehood, he talked about the madness that allowed Ukraine to become independent in 1991. And I said to him, do you think that Vladimir Putin has changed his mind about that, his attitude to that one iota, which, if he had, would feed into any deal or agreement, one imagines. And he said, absolutely not. It is the same President Putin who has the same feelings towards Ukraine. And of course, President Putin, just a couple of months ago, I think in June, I think it was, where he said, I have said many times that I consider the Russian and Ukrainian people to be one people. In this sense, all of Ukraine is ours, and that will have sent a shudder across Ukraine and the people of Ukraine. And I guess it also, begs the question, if the Russian and Ukrainian people really are one people, why has he been bombing Ukraine quite so relentlessly for, 3.5 years?
Yeah, and these attacks have intensified in recent months and days. This onslaught has worsened. I'm told that now senior Russian officials have gone into that press conference room. But yeah, there's real horror in Ukraine watching these talks unfold without Vladimir Zelensky in the room, and actually, from quite a lot of people here in the United States, disbelief that the Russian aggressor is being invited onto a US military base. In fact, just outside the building where these talks are taking place, there is a small protest, people unfurling flags saying, I stand with Ukraine, Putin is a war criminal. There was a more sizable protest here in the centre of Anchorage yesterday. There's a population of Ukrainian refugees here as well. There is a strength of feeling here that Vladimir Putin has no place being involved in these talks without Vladimir Zelensky in the room.
Yeah, and it's interesting the speed with which this summit has been organised, that the Kremlin was very quick to say, and in fact we're told that, as you just said, senior Kremlin officials are now in that news conference, so just waiting for the American officials to arrive, and then we will no doubt hear from the two presidents. There is a Russian official who is saying that the talks went remarkably well. So going back to the point I was going to make, it is that it was arranged so quickly that both sides said that there would be no document to sign. Normally these summits are organised, prepared in advance. They basically know the deal that's going to be done. It becomes a showpiece and they sign said deal. This time, none of that. We were told there's no document to sign, so we assume that what they're doing now is deciding what exactly they're going to say, what each side is going to say. But as I say, the Kremlin, or an official attached to the Kremlin, saying the talks went remarkably well. We wait, of course, to hear what the Americans are going to say.
The hard work is usually done in the background, and these occasions are about tying a neat bow on things. Well, in this case, this meeting has been, or this summit has been, put together so hastily that none of it happened in the normal way. I'm just hearing that there is a special economic envoy to Russia who has assessed the progress of these negotiations. He said they lasted around 2 hours and 45 minutes, that bilat. He said, wonderful, everything is wonderful. So, hopefully Presidents Putin and Trump can expand on that. But certainly, like you were saying, these talks have not broken down. They seem to have,
Well, wonderful, coming from the Russian side, could mean that not much was decided, which would suit them. But that's speculation, and it will be interesting to see how these two presidents deal with this. So there was this suggestion, just about an hour ago, that things were going to go on for quite some time, but that seems to have changed rather suddenly, and it does look as though there's an American correspondents there just doing their turn inside that press conference, and it does seem as though we're going to hear from these two presidents pretty soon. And I mean, it's been a remarkable event in so many ways, and Donald Trump, of course, criticized from many quarters, many guests coming on this program earlier, just before the two met, saying that it was a big mistake. Donald Trump was making a strategic error by allowing Putin to come to the United States and without any conditions imposed on President Putin, conditions like a ceasefire.
Yeah, and a lot of people saying that, you know, he lost the major leverage that he had over Vladimir Putin, which was the fact that he was economically isolated, that he was an international pariah, and by bringing him back in from the cold, by inviting him onto US soil for this summit, he threw away that leverage in a way. Interestingly, Donald Trump said that if these talks did go poorly, that he wasn't going to have a joint press conference with Vladimir Putin. The fact that there are two lecterns set up, the fact that we're now being told by the Kremlin that there will be a joint press conference, suggests that at least in the mind of the US president, he thinks that enough has been done, enough has been achieved in this meeting for him to appear alongside Vladimir Putin.
I mean, President Trump would have to claim victory almost whatever happened, because it was it was Putin's idea, we're told. He requested it, but Trump accepted that invitation, and I guess it's in his interests to claim a success.
Both men desperate to claim victory here. Vladimir Putin, because he's going back to a nation which has witnessed, you know, huge bloodshed, you know, hundreds of thousands of lives lost and injured in Ukraine, you know, an economic disaster in his country. He has to go back with the notion that he has achieved victory here. But so does Donald Trump, because he presents himself as the man who can negotiate in a straightforward way that none of his predecessors could, that he can achieve results where others can't. So he has to be seen to, you know, have achieved something with this summit. Fascinating to see how they both present what has happened in that room. We know now that there'll be this press conference. We also know that Donald Trump will do a number of, or he's already actually done 2 interviews with the news organisation that he is most friendly with over here, Fox News. He'll do another interview with Fox News after this press conference. This is all about Donald Trump, you know, controlling the narrative and ensuring that his message is heard by, you know, the widest audience possible. He wants to make the most of this moment.
Right, where are we? It is 2:45 midnight in the UK, 2:45 in Anchorage, in Alaska, where we are, and 2 hours and 45 minutes of talks between President Putin and President Trump have come to an end, and there is an agreement to hold a news conference, which you can see is set up there. We're told that Russian officials are already in the room, and I think I saw, I think it was Steve Witkoff, but American officials are also either in the room or preparing to enter the room, and then it will be up to these two presidents. Interesting contrast. President Putin, very careful, one imagines, with what he's going to say, the way he says it, as he always is, and Donald Trump, very different. It will be very interesting to see how these men deal with this. And Martha, there was a lot of talk before these before this summit of a kind of grand bargain or the beginnings of a much broader arrangement or agreement with economic issues and maybe even nuclear weapons. So a broader agreement. It would be interesting to see what's happened on that.
Yeah, this idea that Donald Trump believes that he had to offer inducements to President Putin to get him to the negotiating table and then to get him to agree something that looks like a peace deal. Of course, we have no idea if any of that was discussed. I think the fact that they didn't go into this expanded bilateral meeting with their business advisors, with the Commerce Secretary and the Treasury Secretary for Trump, perhaps indicates that they didn't quite get onto that level of talks, maybe. I'm told that Steve Witkoff is now definitely in the room, Donald Trump's special envoy, close friend of his. He was in that smaller bilat meeting. It suggests that Donald Trump is potentially on the way very soon. I guess interesting too, not just who was in Donald Trump's delegation, but who wasn't in Donald Trump's delegation today. The retired Lieutenant General, who is now the US's special envoy to Ukraine, Keith Kellogg, he wasn't there, which seems kind of unusual. He also, Keith Kellogg, who is the US's man when it comes to Ukraine, he wasn't at the talks either that took place in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia in March between US and Russia and the US and Ukraine. And our partner organisation, NBC, was told that Keith Kellogg wasn't invited to those March talks in Saudi Arabia because the Russians had specifically requested that he didn't attend because in their minds he is too sympathetic to the Ukrainian cause. So he again has been overlooked, which when you see the list of people in that room, the fact that the Treasury Secretary is there, the Commerce Secretary, but not US's envoy to Ukraine, that is unusual, and you wonder whether that is the White House bowing down to the Kremlin in a way.
I was speaking to a senior diplomat in London the other day, and he said if Vladimir Putin does agree to some sort of ceasefire, either a temporary ceasefire, a longer term ceasefire, then look very carefully at the conditions that he imposes on that ceasefire. And the suggestion was one condition that the Russians may well put on any ceasefire, if it is a prolonged ceasefire, would be that elections would have to be held in Ukraine. Now, this is quite interesting because, of course, President Putin thinks that President Zelensky is not a legitimate president. He's been saying for a long time, you should be having elections. Why aren't you having elections? Well, the obvious answer to that is, well, how can you have elections when you're bombing us? So that has been the kind of back and forth. But should there be a ceasefire, there is talk that the Russians may put quite a lot of pressure on Ukraine to hold elections. That is not to say at all that that is something that Zelensky would agree to. It was interesting talking to Zelensky in London at the end of June. We did an interview, and I asked him about his popularity in Ukraine. And he said, and there are increasing murmurings about Zelensky, as there would be with, I think, with any leader going through this, what would he do if and he said, well, look, I'm not going to react to just one or two people saying that they don't want me anymore. Yeah. But if there was an obvious groundswell in Ukraine, he said, I would take heed of it. So, President Zelensky himself is in a fairly difficult position.
I think he has indicated, Zelensky, that...
Just say, Martha, I mean, we can see now Pete Hegseth there. Is that Caroline Levitt also coming in?
Yeah.
We've seen Witkoff in, so
yeah, I saw
this
Sergei Lavrov as well,
yes.
Russia's foreign minister,
yes.
arriving too.
In his USSR sweatshirt, no doubt. But this suggests that this, I think we can call it historic press conference, is about to take place. Whether it contains an historic announcement is another thing, but it does seem now as though this is pretty imminent.
Yeah, this will be the first time there's been a full-scale news conference with a US and Russian president since Helsinki in 2018. Of course, Vladimir Putin did meet Biden in Geneva in 2021, but there wasn't a joint press conference on that occasion. So this, the first joint press conference for 7 years between a US and Russian president. I'm told Marco Rubio, I think,
just there in the front.
Arrived. Yeah, so all of the main players are arriving, sitting in the front row. I would imagine nervous times for those advisors, not knowing quite what their bosses are going to say, not knowing, especially in the case of President Trump, if he will stick to the script here.
Yeah, look, we're told it's about a minute and a half away. And now President Trump loves a news conference. There's no question about that. And some of his news conferences go on for, an hour, hour and a half, sometimes more. And he just answers questions. And what is it called? He does the weave, isn't it? The weave, where he sort of answers all sorts of things. I don't think this will be a news conference like that.
Yeah, I don't get the impression that he'll be talking about the situation on the streets of DC. He's not going to be talking about the California governor as he usually does. I would imagine he will stick to the...
Ladies and gentlemen, the President of the United States of America and the President of the Russian Federation.
We are hearing positive remarks from Russia.
Ladies and gentlemen, the President of the United States of America and the President of the Russian Federation.
No idea.
Okay, right, here we go. Let's listen to what these two presidents have to say.
Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen.
Уважаемый господин президент, дамы и господа, наши переговоры прошли в конструктивной и взаимоуважительной атмосфере, были весьма обстоятельными и полезными. Хотел бы еще раз поблагодарить моего американского коллегу за предложение приехать на Аляску. Вполне логично встретиться именно здесь, ведь наши страны, хоть нас разделяют океаны, на самом деле близкие соседи. И я, когда мы встретились, вышли из самолетов, я так сказал: добрый день, дорогой сосед. Очень приятно видеть вас в добром здравии и живым. И по-соседски это очень звучит, по-моему, по-доброму. На самом деле нас разделяет только Берингов пролив, да и то. Там два острова между российским и американским островом. Добрый день, дорогой сосед. Очень приятно видеть вас. Важно также, что в добром здравии и живым. Россия по-соседски это очень звучит, по-моему, живым. По-доброму. Нас разделяет только Берингов пролив, да и то. Там два острова между российским и американским островом всего. Важно также, что с Аляской связана значительная часть общей истории России. Важно также, что с Аляской многие позитивные события. Также и по сей день сохраняется огромное культурное наследие эпохи Русской Америки. Православные храмы, множество, более 700 географических названий, имеющих русское происхождение. В ходе Второй мировой войны именно на Аляске начиналась легендарная авиамагистраль для для поставок боевых самолетов и другой техники по договору о мире. Это был опасный, сложный маршрут над громадными ледяными пространствами, но летчики и специалисты двух стран делали все, чтобы приблизить победу, рисковали, отдавали свои жизни. Вот я сейчас только что был
Agradecemos a los ciudadanos y al gobierno de Estados Unidos por honrar su memoria. Creo que es algo siempre recordaremos cuando nuestros países derrotan a los enemigos comunes, trabajando juntos con un espíritu de camaradería y amistad, apoyándonos mutuamente y propiciando el amor de los unos y los otros. Esto ayudará a promover nexos mutuamente beneficiosos en esta nueva etapa, aún bajo las condiciones más difíciles. Se sabe que no ha habido cumbres entre Rusia y Estados Unidos en 4 años, un tiempo muy largo. Las relaciones bilaterales cayeron durante este tiempo a su punto más bajo desde la Guerra Fría. Eso no ha sido beneficioso ni para nuestros países ni para el mundo. Tarde o temprano tenemos que enmendar la situación para pasar de la confrontación al diálogo. Y en este caso, una reunión personal entre jefes de Estado era algo que se había demorado mucho. Ha habido que hacer un trabajo muy duro y difícil, y se ha hecho en general. El presidente Trump y yo hemos tenido buenos contactos, hemos hablado muchas veces de manera franca, por teléfono, y el enviado especial del presidente, el señor Wickoff, ha viajado varias veces a Rusia. Nuestros asesores y nuestros ministros de Exteriores han estado en contacto y saben muy bien que uno de los puntos cruciales es la situación de Ucrania. Estamos viendo cómo este gobierno y el presidente Trump han estado trabajando para facilitar una resolución del conflicto, y él ha tratado de llegar al punto clave del asunto. Él entiende que la historia es algo precioso. Como he dicho, la situación en Ucrania tiene que ver con una amenaza fundamental a nuestra seguridad. Más aún, siempre hemos considerado que Ucrania, la nación ucraniana, es una nación hermana. Aunque parezca extraño en estas condiciones, tenemos las mismas raíces, y todo lo que sucede es una tragedia para nosotros. Es una herida terrible. Por lo tanto, nuestro país tiene un interés sincero en ponerle fin al conflicto. Al mismo tiempo, estamos convencidos que para poder llegar a una solución a largo plazo, tenemos que eliminar todas las causas subyacentes del conflicto. Y lo hemos dicho muchas veces, considerar las preocupaciones legítimas de Rusia y restablecer un balance justo de seguridad en Europa y el mundo. Y concuerdo con el presidente Trump, quien decía hoy que, naturalmente, la seguridad de Ucrania tiene que quedar garantizada. Naturalmente, estamos preparados para ello. Espero que el avenimiento a que hemos llegado nos acerque a esa meta y allá en el camino para la paz en Ucrania. Esperamos que Kiev y las capitales de Europa perciban esto de manera constructiva y que faciliten la situación. No vamos a tratar de realizar negociaciones por fuera que puedan torpedear el resultado de las negociaciones. Por cierto, cuando el nuevo gobierno entró en funciones, el comercio bilateral comenzó a crecer. Es algo simbólico. Ciertamente ha habido un repunte de 20%. Por supuesto, hay mucho espacio para trabajar conjuntamente. Está claro que las inversiones y la cooperación entre Rusia y Estados Unidos tienen un enorme potencial. Estados Unidos y Rusia pueden ofrecer mucho en comercio, en el ámbito digital, exploración espacial y tecnología. Vemos que la cooperación en el Ártico también es muy posible. Y en el contexto internacional, por ejemplo, en el extremo oriente de Rusia y la costa oeste de Estados Unidos. Es muy importante que nuestros países pasen la página para que volvamos a la cooperación. Es simbólico que no muy lejos de aquí, en la frontera entre Rusia y Estados Unidos, está el uso horario internacional. Literalmente uno puede pasar del ayer al mañana. Y espero que en lo político podamos hacer eso. Quiero agradecerle al presidente Trump por nuestro trabajo conjunto por el tono auspicioso de nuestra conversación. Es importante que ambas partes seamos pragmáticas y tengamos una idea clara de lo que queremos lograr. Él, sinceramente, está interesado en la prosperidad de su nación. Y él comprende que Rusia tiene sus propios intereses nacionales. Yo espero que los acuerdos de hoy sean el punto de partida, no solo para una solución del tema de Ucrania, sino también para rescatar una negociación comercial pragmática entre Rusia y Estados Unidos. Y quisiera decir algo en conclusión. Debo recordarles que en 2022, durante el último contacto con el gobierno anterior, yo traté de convencer a mi colega estadounidense de entonces que la situación no debía llegar a un punto de no retorno en lo concerniente a hostilidades. Y lo dije muy directamente, sería un craso error. Hoy, con el presidente Trump diciendo que si él hubiera sido presidente en ese entonces no habría habido una guerra, y estoy seguro que habría sido así. Puedo corroborarlo. En general, el presidente Trump y yo hemos forjado una relación positiva y tengo todas las razones para pensar que si seguimos por esta senda, vamos a llegar muy pronto al fin del conflicto en Ucrania. Gracias. Muchas gracias, señor presidente. Sus palabras han sido muy profundas, hemos tenido una reunión muy productiva. Hay muchos puntos en los que llegamos a un acuerdo, dos puntos muy importantes que no están totalmente resueltos, pero hemos logrado avanzar. No hay un acuerdo hasta que se llegue a un acuerdo. En breve voy a hablar con la OTAN, voy a hablar con todos los actores importantes, voy a hablarle al presidente Zelensky de la reunión de hoy. En última instancia, ellos tendrán que estar de acuerdo con lo que se ha planteado en las conversaciones con Marcus, Steve y otros miembros del equipo Trump, Scott y John Radcliffe. Muchas gracias. Pero son excelentes líderes que han hecho un trabajo fenomenal. También hemos tenido excelentes representantes del sector comercial de Rusia. Todos quieren negociar con nosotros. Somos el país más pujante del mundo, lo hemos logrado en poco tiempo y estamos ansiosos por abrir las puertas al comercio. Ciertamente hemos logrado un progreso sustancial en el día de hoy. Siempre he tenido una relación fantástica con el presidente Putin, Vladimir. Hemos tenido buenas reuniones, difíciles. Se vieron interferidas por la falacia de Rusia, pero él lo entendió. Y creo que él ha visto cosas similares a lo largo de su carrera. Él lo ha visto todo, pero tuvimos que lidiar con esa falacia. Él sabía que era mentira, y yo también. Fue una acción criminal, pero ciertamente él sabe todas las cosas con las que hemos tenido que lidiar. Pero cuando esto haya pasado, tenemos una buena oportunidad. Para decirlo en breve, voy a hacer unas llamadas telefónicas para referir lo que ha ocurrido, pero hemos tenido una reunión extremadamente productiva, muchos puntos de convergencia. Hay algunos puntos que quedan pendientes. Quizá el más importante, en donde tenemos una buena posibilidad de llegar a eso, es muy probable que lo logremos. Quisiera agradecerle al presidente Putin y a todo su equipo, cuyos rostros en muchos casos conozco, y algunos los veo todo el tiempo en la prensa. Ustedes son casi tan famosos como su jefe, especialmente este que está aquí. Pero hemos tenido buenas reuniones a lo largo de los años, reuniones productivas, y esperamos que eso continúe en el futuro. En cuanto a lo más productivo, vamos a evitar la muerte de miles de personas cada semana. El presidente Putin está tan interesado en esto como yo. Nuevamente, quiero darle las gracias, señor presidente. Volveremos a hablar muy pronto y probablemente volveré a verlo muy pronto. Gracias, Vladimir. La próxima vez en Moscú. Eso es interesante. Bueno, es posible. Muchísimas gracias, Vladimir. Y gracias a todos. Gracias.
Terminan los mensajes del presidente Trump, el líder ruso Vladimir Putin. La próxima vez en Moscú, le dice Vladimir Putin a Donald Trump, y se van sin responder preguntas de la prensa. Importante subrayar, por un lado, Vladimir Putin dice: hemos llegado a un acuerdo. Es importante eliminar la raíz de nuestras preocupaciones sobre Ucrania para alcanzar la paz, restablecer la seguridad en Ucrania, en Rusia, en Europa, garantías de seguridad. Pero sí habla de un acuerdo sobre Ucrania. Y en contraste, el presidente Donald Trump dice: no hay acuerdo hasta que haya acuerdo. Hemos avanzado, pero aparentemente Trump siente que regresa sin nada concretado. Esta ha sido la conferencia de prensa de un día importantísimo para la historia, para la relación entre Estados Unidos y Rusia, y quizá aún más importante para Ucrania, pero importante también subrayar el ausente. Volodymyr Zelensky, el líder ucraniano del país invadido por Rusia, no estaba ahí. Hacemos una pausa. Venimos con más en Telemundo, quédese.